The girl was very scared, but she kept this fear in her hands and did not run away. A huge snake rose high above the ground, opening its wide, toothy mouth. It was about to attack. This monster was right in front of the girl. Perhaps she was simply paralyzed with fear, but still, some courage could be seen in her eyes. It was as if she heard someone shouting at her from the side and asking her to run away. But the girl was looking straight into the mouth of this monster, which could easily swallow her whole. When the snake gave in forward, the girl was overcome with real horror. She literally did not know which way to run and simply remained in place. For a moment, she imagined that these were her last moments of life. She was terrified that perhaps her life could be plunged into darkness. She imagined that her body was being torn into hundreds of small pieces by the monster's huge teeth. She imagined that she would no longer exist. I was very afraid that her head would fall. A huge rift of disaster level formed and hit the Incheonmo area. It was the largest rift since the first Great Rift 10 years earlier. The death toll was 9,000, and the number of missing people was about 150,000. None of the missing were ever found. The local supermarket was very noisy. Each of the traders was trying to get rid of their goods and finish work, so they were calling out to customers in every possible way. The sellers pointed to products with stickers that were already on sale and convinced people to buy them. They asked people not to miss such a good chance and to take the best as quickly as possible. A girl and an adult man reached for the same item, which was the last one left. But the man, without showing any politeness, rudely pushed the girl's hand away, wanting to take the item for himself. The girl was indignant, noting that a man cannot simply snatch goods from someone else's hands, hoping that she will be able to win back what is hers. The man just grinned nastily and asked if the girl wanted to fight for him in that case, and offered to take the goods from her. The girl managed to control herself from such impudence and pointed out that the man had probably gone crazy and emphasized that he should be ashamed of behaving like that because he was an adult. But this had no effect on him, and in the midst of her indignation, he asked if she had enough words to fully object. He was still smirking smugly. The girl had tears in her eyes, and at that moment she really didn't know how to respond to such rudeness. Still, the man took the goods and left. On the counter remained only what she could not afford. The girl sighed heavily, still remaining in place and sadly looking at the half-empty display case. A voice came from behind her asking why she was standing there sadly. The girl was distracted from her thoughts and turned around. There was a woman standing behind her. It was her mother, who reminded her that they had a delicious lunch day and asked her to take what she wanted from the display case. The girl was confused. She said that all the good meat had already been taken, but she herself approached the display case and examined the goods on offer and noted that there was still beef left. The girl noted that the beef was only on sale for 10%, but her mother said that it was better to eat it in the evening than to regret the next day that they hadn't bought the meat. To this, the mother added as an argument that her daughter had an exam for the hunting association the next day, and it was worth eating well before it. The woman said that with such meat, she would be able to put together a very good lunch for the exam. But the girl grimaced, remembering the exam. The mother smiled and asked her daughter, Lee Ji-ho, to try to pass the test the first time, so that she wouldn't have to pack her lunches again. And if she failed and had to retake the test, she would eat something from the convenience store. The girl replied that it was very cruel, but the mother, smiling, noted that she didn't know anything else, and asked her daughter to tell what she had studied for the exam. Lee Ji-ho tensed up a little, not expecting such a question, and asked what exactly her mother wanted to hear. The woman explained that most likely there were stories about monsters and rifts or something like that, and the girl began to remember everything she had studied. She remembered the text from the book, as if she had photographed it and tried to reproduce everything as clearly as possible. She told her mother about sea cucumbers, which were slow and blind but had super sensitive hearing. They said they kept their tentacles away from any noise and that you had to be extremely quiet around them. The girl continued and said that on the other side there were spiders that reacted to movement and usually attacked in groups. Finally, Lee Ji-ho remembered the wild dogs, which, unlike the usual ones, had 6 eyes. And if such a monster was encountered on the way, it was necessary to retreat immediately, at least because of their enormous size. Next, she tried to remember what to do if she suddenly found herself locked inside the rift. At this point, her mother interrupted her and asked if she really wanted to join the Hunters Association. The girl was also surprised by this question. Her mother suggested that she simply not take the entrance exams like the others. The mother was convinced that the girl did not have any special abilities like other hunters, for example. She noted that she just wanted her daughter to choose something safer, something for herself. Mom suggested that Lee Ji-ho could return to her dream of becoming a singer, as she once wanted to as a child. This speech upset the girl quite a bit. She understood that her mother did not want this entry into the hunting association at all, but for her it was extremely important. They never finished speaking. Suddenly, everything around began to shake as if from an earthquake. A terrible roar was heard. Lee Ji-ho asked his mother what was going on, clearly scared. It looked like something huge had collapsed, which was what caused the effect. Lee Ji-ho and her mother looked at the boy standing next to him. He was screaming hysterically while looking at his phone. The jolts and sounds were a sign that a rift had opened up right in front of them. Lee Ji-ho ran to her mother. They were both very scared of what was happening because all the people in this place were in great danger. After that, the lights went out in the entire supermarket. All the visitors fell silent, listening to any extraneous sounds and rustling, after which they gave an official emergency warning about the opening of the vault. A mad panic broke out in the supermarket. Everyone started to fuss and try to find an exit as quickly as possible and get away from this place. Lee Ji-ho asked her mother to put her phone on silent mode and open the vault notification app. They headed for the exit with the crowd, but there was such chaos around. It was hard to take even a few steps because everyone was pushing, running, not paying attention to the people around them. Someone pointed out that a person was stuck under the rubble and asked others not to push so that they could get to the victim and help him. But no one cared about the lives of others. Everyone tried to push through the crowd for their own salvation, thus endangering others. Lee Ji-ho watched in horror as she watched the events around her. It reminded her of an event that happened long ago in her childhood, approximately the same feelings she had already experienced in her life. It was as if she had been transported into the past and saw rescuers in front of her. Everything around was on fire. People were also running around in panic. And she, lost in the crowd, was calling for her father. She screamed how scared she was and asked her father to take her with him. This event was much more scary for her at that age because she still did not understand anything at all. And then, already being an adult girl, having again found herself in a similar situation, the horror did not envelop her even more. It was as if the event had repeated itself. One of the people pushed her very hard, clearing the way for himself, and the girl fell. Her mother immediately ran up to her and tried to help her get to her feet. Panic enveloped people even more, and they began to forget about their humanity. Mom asked her to get up quickly, pointing out that the evacuation of people had already begun. They should also take advantage of this. But the girl did not understand what her mother was telling her, because there was not yet the fourth notification, which promised evacuation. Mom took her hand and said that they should have found shelter first. If they went far enough before the rift opened completely, they would be safe. After which the girl stood up, and her mother led her through the crowd. But then Lee Ji-ho decided that something was going wrong and thought to herself that they shouldn't have rushed so much. She didn't stop and continued to run after her mother. And because of some people who were also trying to find shelter for themselves, well, she already understood that everything would not be so simple. This rift was not like the others. Everything was too fast and carried according to the main instruction that absolutely every person had, according to which it was worth acting during a rift. Lee Ji-ho remembered that as soon as the rift opened completely, various monsters would immediately start crawling out of it. She had studied all of this when she was preparing for the exams and knew what danger they represented, not only because it was told in the news and instructions. And so it happened. The monsters immediately attacked those who were nearby. Cries for help were heard everywhere, but unfortunately, no one could help these unfortunate people. The monsters felt their strength and quickly got out of the rift and rushed at the people. Well, on top of all this, Lee Ji-ho noticed that the rift was getting bigger and bigger, which meant that the number of monsters was also increasing. The girl did not stop, but suddenly she heard her name. When she turned around, she saw a huge snake that had already grabbed its next prey and was already swallowing the previous one. The girl was even more horrified when she saw this scene. She looked straight into the eyes of this monster. The snake, having swallowed its prey, again opened its mouth wide and rushed forward. He rushed straight at Lee Ji-ho. Everything happened so fast that the girl couldn't react right away. As soon as she realized what was happening, She started running as fast as she could. She understood that if she hesitated even for a second, she would end up in that toothy mouth of the monster. Well, and because of the huge panic inside her and around her, her legs got tangled up. The girl fell to the ground in front of her and was badly hurt. The woman shouted to her that she was investigating how to get up as quickly as possible because the monsters were already very close, and the girl began to rise. A huge snake crawled behind the crowd, its huge forked tongue stretched forward. People tried to save themselves and ran from the monsters without looking back. The mother tried to lift her daughter to her feet and pulled her by the hand. Lee Ji-ho was barely giving in. She thought that they would definitely be eaten, and there was no chance of salvation. Her thoughts were only that this was the end, and she believed in it. But the girl still tried to get up. She turned to her mother and said that it was too late for her to save herself. Lee Ji-ho was convinced that it was her that the monsters were following and asked her mother if she saw it. Lee Ji-ho said that if all the monsters rushed after her, then Mom might have a chance to escape. She tried to convince her mother that she had to survive at any cost. She looked her mother in the eyes and started running, no matter how much the woman screamed and tried to stop her. Lee Ji-ho decided that she had to distract the monsters and rushed straight towards them. She ran right in front of the huge snake's nose, hoping that it would notice her and start its hunt. Lee Ji-ho was terribly scared, but he was even more afraid for the lives of his mother and other people. She tried to focus only on the thoughts of saving others, even if it meant sacrificing her own life. She didn't have time to escape, and the monster attacked and inflicted many wounds. Everything in the girl's head was mixed up. She saw helicopters, smoke, and heard noise. She felt the heat on her body from the great fire. She smelled the foul smoke. Eventually, Lee Ji-ho passed out, and when she came to again, everything around her was completely quiet. Water was dripping from the rubble of the building, and only the sounds of drops falling from above broke the silence. One of these drops fell on Lee Ji-ho's face and brought the girl to her senses. The first thing the girl wanted to do was take a deep breath, and she opened her mouth to take in more air. Taking a breath, she regained consciousness and with fear and a scream, tried to jump up. But her body was in terrible pain, and instead of getting up, the girl twisted in pain. She felt as if her whole body was being torn apart, but she still tried to get up through the pain. The first thoughts that came to mind were that she had probably been eaten by the monster and had already died. But kneeling down and looking around, Lee Ji-ho realized that she was still alive. She was alive, except for the place she was in. All the buildings around were destroyed, and those that were still standing were covered in huge cracks and could collapse at any moment. Some of them slowly leaned to the side and partially fell off. Lee Ji-ho felt the air currents on her that were the result of the collapse. The girl, in spite of everything, smiled and leaned on her hands. She was glad to be alive, but noted that the place she was in was like hell. She remembered how the teacher told that when someone was pulled into the rift, the monsters were not the only danger, but a distortion from another dimension that also affected the person's body. The teacher noted that sometimes one could get lucky, and this could lead to the awakening of hunting abilities. Well, most often a person simply ended up being seriously injured so much that he could not recover without mana stones. And before the arrival of the hunters, the main goal was to protect himself and find a safe place. That's why it was so important to keep using the Rift app to update her location. But when Lee Ji-ho took out her phone, she found that it was badly broken. The screen was exposed with serious cracks, and instead of an image, it showed only colored stripes. But despite this, the girl tried to calm herself down and decided that she could really get lucky and survive. Well, the question was, how much time had passed since the rift closed, and whether the hunters would be able to come for her in time. Everything she tried to convince herself of and set herself up for positive thoughts passed. After all, too much time could have passed, and no one could have come for her. She decided to look around again. When she raised her head up, she was horrified again. Not far from her, on the ruins of one of the buildings, stood a huge spider. Lee Ji-ho held her breath and tried not to move so that the monsters wouldn't notice her. She covered her mouth to prevent any sound she might make uncontrollably. She hid and simply waited for the huge army of spiders to pass by. She was really scared. She knew she had to use all the information she knew to give herself a chance to survive. For a long time, the girl did not move and practically did not breathe, waiting for the spiders to go away from her. They were several times larger than her and reminded her of how dangerous these monsters were. Soon, Lee Ji-ho could allow herself to move a little from her place, since the spiders were no longer visible. She hoped that all the monsters had gone away and was glad that it seemed they hadn't noticed her. This was her chance, and she started running. The girl had to find the safest place as quickly as possible, but even escaping without getting hurt was difficult. Lee Ji-ho clung to the debris and injured herself. She understood that there were too many sharp objects around, and if she continued to cling to everything, that is, something would bleed without even getting out of the rift. Coming out into a safer-looking alley, she slowed down and began looking for something to cover herself with. Her gaze fell on one of the broken display windows of a clothing store. The windows and doors were broken and she could easily climb in. This seemed like a very good idea to her. She took the things and decided that it would be good to leave the money to the owner of this store. She didn't want to just take the things and decided to pay for them as much as she could. Having dressed and thus protected herself a little from scratches, she listened and assumed that the spiders had already left, because it was very quiet outside. Opposite the clothing store, I noticed a grocery store, which was also very convenient. She took some food and water with her, because without it, she certainly had little chance of survival. She had food, water, and even candy. It was very difficult to bring a backpack, and she assumed that perhaps she took too much with her. But she was more worried that she did not have a working phone. She walked along the broken streets and tried to figure out what to do with the phone, because she needed to get in touch. Lee Ji-ho was worried about her mother, because she didn't know if she had managed to get out of the rift and hoped that she wasn't running around mindlessly looking for her daughter. Lee Ji-ho thought that her mother really didn't like being alone, and this situation could drive her crazy. It brought her to tears. The girl wiped the tears from her face with the sleeve of her sweater. She convinced herself that she should have cried later, because in her situation, tears could not have helped in any way. They were too valuable in this situation, and she tried her best to calm down. It was impossible to get distracted and stop, because at any moment she could be attacked. After walking a little further, the girl noticed something that greatly interested her. She stopped and looked at the task in front of her. A white homemade flag was sticking out from one of the windows. Taking a closer look, Lee Ji-ho was convinced that it was indeed a flag, which was definitely the net of a survivor like her. She emphasized to herself that it was only worth changing the approach, and she was immediately able to notice what she had not seen before. Having discovered this flag, she rushed to run to the building. She was thinking that apparently it wasn't so easy for people to die. But her thoughts were so wild that inattention returned and the girl stopped looking at her feet and caught an empty tin can. This kick made a lot of noise and attracted too much unnecessary attention to the girl. The monster immediately reacted to the noise and, noticing Lee Ji-ho, rushed after her. The girl immediately noticed the tentacles of this monster under her feet. She became scared again. The monster knocked her down and the girl fell to the ground. A sea cucumber was following her. He could not see well, but he could even hear quiet rustling sounds. The monster also moved not very slowly, and while Lee Ji-ho was getting up, it did not catch up quickly. She stepped back while sitting because she no longer had the opportunity to jump to her feet and run. She needed to distract him somehow. Quite by chance, Lee Ji-ho's hand touched a plastic bottle that could be very useful. When she heard the rustle of plastic under her hand, she was pleasantly surprised. It was just what she needed, and she immediately grabbed it in her hand. Without wasting a second, the girl threw the bottle straight at the monster. I just threw the bottle at the monster, and Lee Ji-ho started running. The bottle hit the monster straight, stopping it for a short while. The monster didn't appear right away, so what distracted him? Thanks to this, Lee Ji-ho bought herself some time. This was her chance. The girl ran as fast as she could to at least slightly escape the monster's pursuit. She needed to get to the building where she had seen the survivor's flag. This place might be safe. She ran through the doors of the building. It was very dark inside and it was difficult to see what was going on. Luckily for her, the tentacles were distracted by a bottle of water and everything went according to her plan. She had time to hide. Well, for a moment, the girl felt sorry for this creature who was struggling violently in an attempt to deal with the bottle. Lee Ji-ho hid behind one of the counters to catch her breath. Next, she had to quietly sneak into the building and check if there were any survivors. She didn't immediately notice that she wasn't alone in this room. There was also a small child hiding from the shelves. When Lee Ji-ho heard rustling sounds not far from her, she jumped up in fear. The child she saw was also very scared. The girl began to carefully come out from behind the shelf. The girl came closer to Lee Ji-ho and asked if everything was okay with her. Lee Ji-ho was very surprised that she saw a child in front of her. She had hoped to meet an older person with whom they could get out of the rift together, but not a little girl that she would have to look after. Lee Ji-ho, still at a loss, replied to the girl that she was fine. The child immediately ran up to her and covered her mouth with his little hands. The girl asked Lee Ji-ho not to make noise, because if there were loud sounds, the monster might return, and then noted that her mother told her not to go out too often and to stay at home. Lee Ji-ho realized that she had made a mistake and whispered to explain that she was so happy to see another survivor that she didn't even notice the other monster. The child asked Lee Ji-ho to quickly go inside the building and led her through the corridors. Lee Ji-ho tried to walk very quietly and slowly, matching the girl's steps. She asked the girl if her mother was with her, and she replied that her mother was sleeping at home. Lee Ji-ho was happy about this because the girl was not alone and asked how long the girl had been in this place. The girl said that she had been in this place for 5 nights already. Lee Ji-ho heard this and was worried that so much time had indeed passed. The girl approached one of the doors in the corridor and quietly opened it, noting that they were almost there. Lee Ji-ho put a smile on her face and stepped over the threshold and greeted each other warmly. But then her friendliness changed to disgust and fear. She suddenly covered her mouth and nose with her hand, feeling a terrible smell, and asked the girl what it smelled like. Lee Ji-ho noticed that there were big black flies everywhere. But the girl apparently didn't notice the flies. But she smelled the smell and asked Ji-ho if she smelled the smell too. The girl said that she constantly asked her mother to wash herself, but she refused. At that moment, Lee Ji-ho saw the girl's mother herself. Lee Ji-ho was horrified by this scene. Her eyes filled with horror because she immediately realized that the girl's mother was not just sleeping. The girl approached her mother's bed and, turning to Lee Ji-ho, asked her to wash her face, showing her where the water was, noting that it also smelled. Lee Ji-ho couldn't move. It was a very scary picture, and she didn't know how to act. She understood perfectly well that the child did not realize what had happened to her mother, and it was necessary to speak to her carefully so as not to frighten her. Lee Ji-ho asked the girl why it was tied to the outside, to which she replied that she learned about it in kindergarten. Afterwards, the girl noted that her mother said that they should have collected water in advance and asked Ji-ho if she was a good girl, something she had thought about before. Lee Ji-ho couldn't even give this child a coherent answer. She couldn't take her eyes off the woman's corpse lying on the bed. She only asked the girl to call her Ji-ho, who called out his full name. The girl called herself Ham Sat-bell and said that she was from the Rose group at Minso Kindergarten. She was a smiling child, despite what was happening around her. Lee Ji-ho tried to smile and sat down opposite her and explained to the girl that her mother was tired. Na promised to help them get out of there, but explained that for this they needed a phone to contact the hunters. Lee Ji-ho asked the girl if she had a phone, and she smiled and replied that her mother had the phone and asked her to keep it with her, but it was dead. Ham Sat-bell handed the phone to Lee Ji-ho. Indeed, it was turned off, but this was at least something that Lee Ji-ho was undoubtedly happy about. She picked up the phone and examined it. There was something about this phone that interested her. Under the phone case, there was a small note, most likely written by the girl herself. The girl noticed that Lee Ji-ho was puzzled and began to take off the cover and asked her what happened. The girl asked if they could use the phone, but Lee Ji-ho didn't answer right away because she wanted to read the note quickly. After looking at it, Lee Ji-ho smiled and stroked the girl's head, assured her that everything was fine, and suggested looking for a charger. Lee Ji-ho suggested that the girl look for the battery while her mother was sleeping, thinking that they had every chance of finding it, and the girl happily agreed. Lee Ji-ho pointed to the exit of the apartment, suggesting that they start searching from there, and reminded them that they had to move quietly so that the monsters outside wouldn't notice them. Ham Sat-bell, smiling, quietly left the apartment, puzzled by her interesting task. Lee Ji-ho followed her. Before closing the door to the apartment, she turned around one last time. She still didn't know how to explain to Ham Sat-bell what had happened to her mother, and this made her feel uneasy. Ham Sat-bell hurried Lee Ji-ho because she couldn't wait for them to start searching. Lee Ji-ho closed the door to the apartment and, asking the little girl not to run so as not to collide, walked down the corridor. In the note that Lee Ji-ho read from her phone, Ham Sat-bell's mother asked her to take care of her daughter and, after she was rescued, deliver her to the specified address of her grandmother. They went into each apartment and tried to find a charger or battery for the phone. The apartments were destroyed after the break-in. Lee Ji-ho and the boar Sat-bell looked into every drawer and checked everything as thoroughly as possible. After a long search, Lee Ji-ho asked the girl if she had found anything, but she was upset and said that she had found nothing. Lee Ji-ho heard how loudly Sat-bell's ham's stomach was growling and it was very noticeable from her appearance how hungry she was. In one of the boxes, where there were children's toys and some other things, Lee Jiho noticed an apple and suggested that the ham Satbel eat it first, and then continue the search. In the same box, Lee Jiho found a pack of instant food, which was also very good in their situation. While the girl was eating, Lee Jiho asked her if she had been in the house all the time and had never gone out. The girl, without looking up from her meal, replied that there had been scary sounds outside all the time, and that she had stayed at home. Ham Satbel said that her mother explained that if they stayed at home, the hunters would come and take them away, and so she waited for the hunters and for her mother to wake up. After that, the girl asked if they would go outside when her mother woke up, and noted that since the girl came into the apartment, it was interesting when the other hunters would come. Lee Jiho didn't know what to answer the child to this question. She hoped that the child wouldn't ask these questions with complicated answers. She herself had no idea when the hunters would come, because there had been no news for a whole week. Lee Jiho fearfully assumed that this could mean that the hunters had passed them by and might never find them at all. Ham Satbel, not having received an answer, became worried and reminded the girl of herself by calling her. She understood that the child was also very frightened by the situation, and smiling at her, assured her that everything would be fine and the hunters should come soon. Lee Jiho stood up and suggested continuing the search, but the girl heard something and was distracted by it. She gestured to the girl not to make a sound and began to listen, staring at one place. She looked restless because she heard some sounds outside the door. Soon, Lee Jiho herself heard these rustling sounds. She came closer to the girl and began to listen and wait with her to see what would happen next. The sounds grew louder and louder. It was clear that there was someone or something behind the door. Lee Jiho and the boar Satbel were scared. They were in a dead end with no other way out. They started knocking on the door sharply, and eventually someone started shouting, asking if there was anyone alive behind the door, and immediately complaining that there wasn't a single living soul in the building. Ham Satbel threw herself into Lee Jiho's arms, scared by the knocking and screaming. She remembered out loud that her mother had asked her to be quiet because of the monsters that were coming towards the sound. For Lee Jiho, these screams and knocking meant that there were other survivors besides the two of them. She thought that if she did nothing, the monsters outside might come into the building. But she was scared because even if they opened the doors, there was no guarantee that there wasn't a monster right behind her. The cries for more survivors changed to cries for help. Lee Jiho grimaced, not knowing what to do. Ham Satbel hugged Lee Jiho tightly and grabbed her legs with her hands, seeking protection. However, Lee Jiho could not restrain herself and, leaving the girl in the room, rushed to the front door to help that unknown person. Before opening the doors and walking out into the hallway, Lee Jiho grabbed a piece of pipe. This pipe was intended to serve as a weapon if necessary. Lee Jiho walked out into the hallway and shouted for the man to follow her voice, noting that there were still survivors. The unknown stranger was a girl. She looked extremely bad, and judging by her bloody clothes, she was wounded. Lee Jiho asked her to go as quickly as possible before the monsters came to their screams. The girl was afraid, but she remained standing in the corridor, waiting for a survivor. But for a long time, no one appeared from the dark corridor. She was ready to both fight this man and protect him, despite the anxiety she felt. She was getting more and more worried. Lee Jiho heard rustling and rumbling, but no one appeared. But she did not dare to go into that dark corridor. She still managed to wait for the girl to appear. She ran with all her might, but it was obvious how weak she was. She was also very scared, and apparently monsters were chasing her. The girl flew into the room where the boar Satbel and Lee Jiho were as if monsters were chasing her on her heels. And indeed, the monster was still pursuing her and was already trying to enter the building. The girl, finding herself in the room, fell to the floor and, cursing, was glad that she was alive. When the girl stood up and turned to her saviors, she was indignant that, according to her, they were just a bunch of damn kids. Ham Satbel thought it was a man and asked the man if everything was okay with him. And Lee Jiho handed her water, to which the girl only snorted that she was not a man. She greedily began to drink the water and drained the bottle almost to the bottom, all the while closely watching Lee Jiho. After finishing her water, the girl told Lee Jiho that if she was going to be careful, she should have done it before opening the doors, and noted that no matter how hard someone begged for help, they shouldn't open the doors before realizing who it was. The girl explained this by the fact that as soon as people realized that they were safe, they could attack their saviors. The girl cursed again because she was all wet with sweat, and taking off her sweater, noted that she could have been some kind of creepy old man who posed a danger. After that, the girl introduced herself as Gong Suhi and said that she slept on her day off and woke up just in time for the fourth break signal. Ham Satbel looked at Lee Jiho and noted that this Unni was stupid because the signals were very loud, to which Suhi slightly displeasedly explained that she was a rather sound sleeper. Lee Jiho asked what happened, and Suhi asked again if there was a question about monsters chasing her, and noted that she would like to find out herself. She took out her phone and, looking at the time, noted that she was completely exhausted and asked to let her sleep for an hour. Lee Jiho immediately jumped up to Suhi with a shout, startling her. She was overjoyed to see the phone working. Suki realized that they were talking about her phone and was surprised that Lee Jiho didn't have it. The girls had to explain that it was there but dead, and they didn't have a charger. After this, Suki realized that this was why the girls were so scared, and scratching her head, suggested finding a charger later so that they could also contact the hunters. While laying down, Suki explained that the more reports of survivors the hunters received, the easier it would be for them to find them, which Lee Jiho fully agreed with. Suki suggested that everyone take a rest, noting that she herself was tired of everything that was happening. Ham Satbel, leaning on Lee Jiho's back, very weakly said that he also really wanted to sleep. Lee Jiho was still very tense and trying to make sure that they were definitely safe. Having looked at the screen of the phone dryly and seeing that it was already 12 o'clock in the evening, she agreed to rest. Soon they all lay down to rest a little, because no one knew what awaited them even in the shortest time. Lee Jiho lay down next to Ham Satbel and immediately fell fast asleep, because she too had been very tired lately. Her deep sleep could have lasted until the morning, but the situation changed. She began to wake up from some strange sounds that she could not immediately identify. Suki woke up and started to wake up Lee Jiho. As soon as the girl opened her eyes and sat up, the girl asked her if she had been hiding like that with the child for several days. Trying to come to her senses, Lee Jiho replied that she had only recently met this girl. Suki sat down next to her and asked where the girl had been all this time before this meeting. Lee Jiho calmly said that she had been in a store 2 blocks away from this house because she had been outside when the warning system went off. Suhi. But she didn't answer anything and thought about something. Lee Jiho guessed what this question could be about and asked Suhi if it meant that she had been hiding in this building for 3 days, which she confirmed and explained what was on the top floor. She said she ran out when she heard the alarm, but when she realized the elevator wasn't working, she went down the fire escape. Lee Jiho asked why she even went outside and assumed it was because of the sea cucumber. Lee Jiho thought that she saw him too, and so she entered through the main entrance. Suki ruffled her hair and replied that if the girl had checked the other entrances, it would never have occurred to her to go inside, and explained that it was a huge building, so there were a lot of exits. Suki said that except for the entrance Lee Jiho entered through, all the others had collapsed or were swarming with monsters, making it almost impossible for him to approach. Suhi was surprised that Lee Jiho actually fought off the monsters outside and got inside, to which the girl replied that it was not that difficult, and explained that she distracted the monsters by creating llamas in the opposite direction. Suhi noted with delight that Lee Jiho was braver than she looked, to which she pointed out that she was without a phone and didn't have much of a choice. Looking at Suhi, Lee Jiho asked why she didn't leave, since there were monsters inside too, and the exit wasn't destroyed. Exhaling, Suki noted that sometimes monsters appeared inside buildings, especially in large ones like the one they were in. She stressed that someone had written in the house chat before his death that there was a monster at the entrance to the building. Many other residents had written about their hopes for survival. Suki said that this house had 3 entrances. The central entrance was teeming with monsters and was therefore sealed, just like the eastern one. More than half of the people who tried to escape through the emergency exit probably died, according to Suka. The monsters occupied a huge territory. If someone hadn't frozen the emergency exit, everyone would have been dead. This really horrified Lee Jiho and made him realize that Suhi was frozen in the emergency exit, and she asked her directly. It was clear that it was difficult for Suki to talk about this, but she said that she had no other choice. It was the only thing she could do. Lee Jiho might not understand, so she didn't try to judge. After a brief silence, Suki said she was very happy to meet other survivors. The girl's whole body began to tremble. Her hands were covered in moisture, and she noted that she was sure that she would not be able to get out of this house on her own. Lee Ji-ho was very excited by his new acquaintance's trembling, but she didn't answer. And then Suki said that she didn't want to die alone. The girls sat in silence for a while. Lee Ji-ho tried to comprehend everything her new acquaintance had said. Lee Ji-ho listened to hear any sounds in the corridor outside the door, but she heard nothing. Well, she noted that apparently that thing didn't hear them, even though they were making such a loud noise, to which Suki said that that monster seemed to have no ears, so it couldn't hear. If there were, he would have eaten them the moment they started screaming. But they were still fine. Lee Ji-ho guessed that he might have been trying to make it seem like there was someone else there, but Suki doubted that he was so intelligent, and noted that, according to her observations, he sucked in everything he came into contact with. And since he didn't seem to have enough intelligence to open the door, this house was quite safe. Suhi said that there were many ways to avoid this monster, but another was more dangerous. Lee Ji-ho was terrified because she didn't know about the existence of anyone else. Suko said that the monster was upstairs, and that monsters usually tried not to enter each other's territories, and where they were not together, it should be safe. Suki noted that the slug was slow, and that it almost caught her at the top, but when it saw the slime, it slowly backed away, giving up territory. It turned out that at that very moment there were 3 monsters in that building. The sea cucumber that Lee Ji-ho saw at the entrance, a mysterious slime crawling on the floor where the apartment in which the girls were hiding was located, and the third was a fast monster that was chasing its prey. Suhi tried to reassure Lee Ji-ho that if that nimble one had been on the floor with them, the 3 of them would no longer be alive, and therefore they should be glad that that slippery creature was on the floor with them. After these words, Suhi stood up and headed towards the front door. Lee Ji-ho called out to her excitedly, but Suki didn't react, but on the contrary, she came closer to the door and listened. Lee Ji-ho became even more worried and asked what Suhi was doing, but Suhi asked her to come closer. When Lee Ji-ho approached, Suhi opened the door slightly and asked her to look at the other end of the corridor, after which they both looked out into the corridor. She asked Lee Ji-ho to focus on the sound and look closely, noting that the monster was using camouflage. Lee Ji-ho did as Suhi asked and stared at the opposite end of the corridor, trying to see the monster they were talking about. Lee Ji-ho replied that she saw some vibrations similar to a mirage, but she could not clearly see the monster. Suki pushed the girl back into the room and closed the door, asking if she had looked closely at the monster, noting that to leave this building, they simply had to go around it and pass the sea cucumber at the entrance. She reminded that the entrance she had mentioned earlier was not an option, since it was impossible to simply walk in. Lee Ji-ho nodded and replied that she understood everything. After that, Suki went deep into the room and asked Ji-ho when she was going to leave. The girl was very confused and answered that she should have found some exercise and something to eat first. Suki asked what happened to her personal phone, and Ji-ho said that it broke and she just threw it away. Suki looked at the girl in surprise, not expecting that she could just throw away her phone. But after that, Suhi thought about something, and soon her facial expression revealed the presence of some idea. But she only slightly hugged Ji-ho by the shoulders and did not notice that no matter what happened, everything was now fine, and asked the girl not to lose hope. Suki suggested looking for a charger and asked in other places if they could leave and if the baby would look for them when she woke up. Lee Ji-ho realized that Suki had apparently misunderstood her. Well, I decided to answer her questions in order and noted that I didn't know whether the girl would look for them, since she had only known her for a short time. Suki was surprised and noted that she thought they were sisters, despite the fact that they both looked completely different, thinking to herself that there was nothing cute about this child. Lee Ji-ho decided to write the girl a note indicating that she would be back soon and went to look for a charger. The girls carefully walked out of the room, leaving the baby to rest alone. When the girls went out into the corridor, Suhi closed the room. Lee Ji-ho was surprised that the girl was not going to close the door, because the monster could appear at any moment. But Suhi replied that they would quickly check the nearby places and return back, and in the current situation, they could not afford to be absent for so long. Lee Ji-ho was embarrassed, but she said out loud that Suhi was right after all. They walked down the corridor with extreme caution, trying to find places where there might be a phone charger. They walked literally on tiptoe so that the slime monster couldn't hear them, if he did have ears. Suki thought to herself that before, because of all the fuss, she didn't notice. But now that they were alone, she felt awkward. Overall, Lee Jiho also felt awkward and very confused. And besides, her new acquaintance was very strange. Suki. He turned around and whispered that there were several faults in this area, so housing prices had dropped significantly. And in a normal situation, a house of this size and at this price could only be bought in some village. She noted that the higher the floor, the cheaper the apartments were, and the fourth and fifth floors were considered royal. In case of danger, one could quickly escape from there or wait for rescue inside the house. Lee Jiho answered with a slight smile that she didn't know this because she herself was from the Namshin area, where the atmosphere was almost like a village. Remembering to herself that they bred cows there and you could hear the croaking of frogs. Suki chuckled awkwardly, noting that she had said something useless to a child who should only be worried about his studies, and asked for an apology. Suki recalled that the girl had talked about going to the grocery store and noted that there was a large supermarket opposite the station. She added that there were also faults in her area. Lee Jiho confirmed all of this. Suki suggested that the area was quite dangerous, to which Lee Jiho explained that her father had passed away during the Great Rift and they had no money to move. Suki sympathized with the girl, but Jiho assured her that everything was fine because they didn't know anything about the rifts back then. She noted that at that time no one knew what to do when a fault appeared and continued to walk quietly forward. At that time, they all just trembled in fear and waited until the rifts naturally disappeared. Those who survived had to hide from the monster and endure until they found themselves on the brink of starvation. This caused countless deaths of ordinary people, including the death of Lee Jiho's own father. His portrait hung on the wall of all the victims after that rift. The number of people who died then was really very huge. These were broken destinies not only of these people but also of their families. Near this wall, Lee Jiho's mother was kneeling, and one man was bowing before her, begging for forgiveness. Thanks to her husband, he survived, but he felt sorry that he was the one who survived instead of Lee Jiho's father. He stated that Lee Jiho's mother could blame him for this as much as she wanted, and blamed himself for stumbling back then. With a trembling voice, Lee Jiho's mother replied that all this was not true. This left the young man in shock. Lee Jiho's mother looked at him with tears in her eyes and replied that her husband had always been such a person. In parallel with the conversation, the girl still found some boxes that could have contained a phone charger. Lee Jiho said that her mother said about her father that even if he had not helped the man that the monster was chasing, he still would not have been able to return safely. Suhi, either by chance or on purpose, leaned against Lee Jiho's shoulder. With sadness in her voice, she said that she too lost her entire family after the Great Rift. And at that time, no one was really cared for except the victims, and almost no compensation was paid. Then they created complete chaos by opening up the bodies to pay compensation only for those who were killed by the monsters, and as a result, Suki buried the empty coffins of her family members. Suki noted that they both lost their families due to the faults, and with a forced smile noted that their situations were apparently very similar. Lee Jiho smiled back at her, thus agreeing. Decided to end this sad conversation. Suki said that they should have quickly found a charger, with which Jiho completely agreed. After that, Lee Jiho asked if they couldn't find out through the app whether the hunters had come, to which Suki replied that yesterday she had received a message that the hunters had entered the rift. The information was not updated in real time. The girl noted that she saw information that some blocks were restored and showed the information on her phone to Lee Jiho, wondering how the girl's phone could last so long. Suki explained that there was a charger where she had been hiding before, but she simply couldn't take it because she had to quickly get out of there. Soon Suhi happily called out to Lee Jiho, noting that she had managed to find a charger in one of the boxes. Lee Jiho was very happy that Suhi had dug up the charger, and sadly noted that she herself had not been able to find anything, to which Suhi laughingly stated that it was not that difficult. Suki tried to insert the charger into the socket on the phone, but nothing worked. Suhi loudly cursed because of the inappropriate exercise, to which Lee Jiho reminded her that she should have been quieter and not shouted. Suki continued to be indignant, noting that the world had become what it is. But until now, there were different types of exercises. Suki calmed down and looked at Lee Jiho, who was muttering about something and looking up somewhere, and also raised her head. Lee Jiho definitely had some interesting thought that she was trying to think about carefully. Afterwards, she asked Suka if they had time to go down to the floor below, which the girl did not understand at all, and asked why they would do that. Lee Ji-ho noted that they were running out of food and didn't know when the hunters would arrive. And as they were climbing up, she noticed a 24-hour convenience store on the first floor. Ji-ho wondered if they could get there if they were careful with the sea cucumber. Suhi thought that there were certainly more hungry mouths, but the first floor was dangerous. After thinking about it, Suhi suggested that they should return to Ham Satbel for now and solve the food problem later. But this answer was unexpected for Lee Ji-ho. But she still agreed, and the two of them went to the room where Ham Satbel was supposed to be. Lee Ji-ho, when they walked a little down the corridor, asked Suhi if she thought Satbel had already woken up. The girl assumed that the girl might have gotten hungry and woken up. At that moment, Lee Ji-ho stopped abruptly. She asked Suki to stop too, seeing something ahead. On the floor lay the things the girl had slept on when they left. Lee Ji-ho noted with horror that the girl had disappeared somewhere. Indeed, when Suhi looked over Lee Ji-ho's shoulder, she also saw only a blanket. But the girl was gone. Suddenly, a rumble was heard from the elevator shaft. It was immediately clear that someone had used it. He was going down, as the digital indicator showed. He passed floor after floor and most likely moved to the lowest stages, because he was already on the fourth. Soon the indicator stopped changing, stopping at the number 3. The girls entered the room. Lee Ji-ho called out to Satbel, but the girl did not answer. Lee Ji-ho turned to Suhi in horror, noting that the girl had still left and was now in great danger. Suki ruffled her hair as usual and assumed that Satbel had probably gone looking for them when she woke up and found no one. But Lee Ji-ho didn't understand why she did that. She was convinced that the note on the door would convince the girl not to go anywhere and to wait for them calmly. Suki thought for a moment and reminded her that the girl was only 5 years old, which meant that she most likely could not read. Suhi noted that most children did not learn this until they were 7 years old. Lee Ji-ho knew that Suhi might be right, but she still did not understand why the girl decided to go outside. Lee Ji-ho remembered the monsters that roamed the corridors and were very difficult to see. Lee Ji-ho's calm didn't last long and she started screaming loudly, calling the girl's name. Suhi tried to calm her down, because such screams would definitely attract monsters. But Lee Ji-ho continued to scream and beg the girl to answer her, ignoring Suhi's attempts to somehow calm her down. Lee Ji-ho was ready to immediately go looking for the girl, and Suhi had to take her by the shoulders, restricting her movement. She suggested that perhaps she shouldn't have said that. But she emphasized that if Lee Ji-ho continued to yell like that, all the local monsters would hear them and attack. Lee Ji-ho understood this but was very worried about the girl. She could not contain her emotions and cried. Trying to pull herself together, Lee Ji-ho asked Suhi if there really was no one else in the house and explained that there could have been other survivors. Suki agreed with her, because it could be quite likely, and many would hardly stick their heads out of their apartments after hearing some scary sounds, so they could go unnoticed. Lee Ji-ho began to ask Suhi to go downstairs as she had originally wanted, but now to search for the girl. Suki was not at all delighted with such a proposal because she knew how dangerous it could be for them. Lee Ji-ho suggested that if Satbel was not anywhere nearby, then most likely she could have left through the emergency exit. Suki exhaled heavily and stated that they couldn't go through the emergency exit, which Lee Ji-ho didn't understand at all. Suki was already at the limit of her emotions and reminded that their floor was the safest place and was surprised that the girl was really going to risk everything and give birth to the girl she met the day before. Suhi grabbed her hair and said that the girl had most likely already been grabbed by that monster, like her friends who were trying to go down the fire escape. Lee Ji-ho looked at her, trying to find at least some words to convince the girl, but she was so shocked by her words that the reaction was completely ambiguous. While they were silently looking at each other, the door to the room quietly opened, and the boar Satbel came out of the door as if nothing had happened and asked the girls if they had quarreled, clearly worried about it. The girl was about to cry and asked the girls not to quarrel. These screams scared her very much. Lee Ji-ho immediately rushed to her and carefully sat down and hugged her shoulders, hearing that the girl had not gone far. Satbel explained that she thought that the girls had abandoned her. She held the note tightly in her hand and said that her mother had not woken up, and she did not know what to do if Lee Ji-ho left her. Lee Ji-ho wiped the tears from her face with special tenderness and did not explain that everything was wrong, and they just went in search of food, worried that she would remain hungry. The girl heard that Lee Ji-ho was worried about her and asked for forgiveness. Suhi did not get involved in this dialogue and silently watched this touching scene. although she did not experience any feelings. Although deep down Suki was worried about this child, she simply put her safety above everything else. Instead of support, Suhi became indignant and scolded the girl for not staying in the room and going somewhere alone. Lee Ji-ho went crazy and explained that the girl was most likely looking for her Unnie. But Suki did not calm down and continued to scold the girl, noting that just because she is a child, she cannot do everything you think, and pointed out that because of her 2 adults almost died. Suki approached the girl and pointed her finger at the piece of paper, asking her to read it. The girl obeyed and, taking the note, began to read what was written very slowly, syllable by syllable. After reading half of the sentence, the girl said that she did not know how to read any further. Suki exhaled, softened, and admitted that she was guilty of yelling. Lee Ji-ho asked the girl not to do it again, and even though she was guilty, she promised that it would not happen again. After finding out about this situation, Satbel turned to Lee Ji-ho and asked what happened to the monster that was in the elevator. This question simply stunned the girl, because she had no idea about any monster in the elevator. Judging by the expression on Suhi's face, she also had no idea about such a monster and was no less shocked than Lee Ji-ho. The girls looked at each other. I don't understand what the girl is talking about. The fact that they were very scared by her words could not be hidden. But the girl was convinced that there was definitely a monster in the elevator because she was not far from it. Lee Ji-ho asked the girl to tell more about something she was saying, and Satbel said that she heard a loud knock. She said she heard someone talking inside the elevator and wanted to open the doors to look. But she was stopped by the fact that someone inside the elevator began to say very bad and scary words, and she did not dare to come closer. Suki, why did these words make you so angry? The girl continued to tell about how the man in the elevator threatened to kill someone and did not calm down. Lee Ji-ho looked at Suhi and noticed how her hand was shaking and realized that something was wrong. Suki was absolutely shaking and barely audibly called out to Ji-ho. Lee Ji-ho started to get up and tried to find out if everything was okay with Suhi, who continued to shake and grabbed her jacket to try to make some space for herself to breathe. Lee Ji-ho approached her and began to shake her gently to bring the girl to order, and continued to ask what was happening. But the girl seemed not to hear the questions and tried to deny them as much as possible. Kasyusha and Suki said that real psychos lived in this house, but she didn't even expect that they were so crazy. Suki said that all these people ran to the emergency exit and were most likely already dead. Lee Ji-ho asked if this meant that when Suhi ran away, she heard something. But the girl objected and assured that she did not hear anything. Suki asked Ji-ho if there were many simpletons who were willing to open their doors to anyone. She was indignant at something, and noted that this meant that there were other survivors. Satbel watched their dialogue, very worried. Suki replied that the presence of other survivors was possible, but that also meant that there was some madman in their building who was muttering about murder. Suki was jokingly scared and asked if they could stay in this room and noted that with the bread and snacks they found, they could last at least a week. Lee Ji-ho knew something terrible had happened and asked Suha if anything strange had happened while she was hiding. After this question, the girl fell silent and turned away. After thinking for a bit, she still answered that something strange had happened. She said that wherever she looked, the world was just gray, and it made her sad. She kept hearing strange sounds, and the air was filled with the stench of rotting corpses, so she figured something had definitely happened. She didn't understand what the point was in living each new day. She thought about it because all the hunters had hidden somewhere and wouldn't come out. These thoughts gave her a headache, and she didn't continue right away. While Suhi was coming to her senses, Lee Ji-ho heard a squelching sound from the hallway. She grabbed Suki and whispered to her that something was coming straight into their room. But Suki did not understand what the girl was saying to her, noting that she could not hear anything. Suki asked Satbel if she heard anything, but Lee Ji-ho was sure that there was something behind the door and asked everyone to hurry. Soon, someone tried to open the handle of their door, but since it didn't give in, he left. Suki noted that Lee Ji-ho was right and asked how she knew about it. Lee Ji-ho avoided the question and asked to first tell Suhi who the person who kept talking about murder was. The girl was embarrassed and noted that she had no way of knowing this. Lee Ji-ho emphasized that his trajectory did not intersect with the monsters and that he seemed to be avoiding them. Lee Ji-ho also noted that Suhi was always hiding something from her. It was clear that Suhi immediately drooped and lowered her eyes to the floor. Lee Ji-ho insisted that the girl had to tell the truth. Otherwise, they would not be able to get out of this house alive. Suki was silent for a while, not knowing what to say. But still, once again exhaling, she replied that it didn't matter at all. She explained that it didn't matter because if they suddenly ran into that man, it would be the end for them. When the elevator stopped again, its doors began to slowly creak open, but it was very dark inside. This madman tried to speed up the opening of the door and grabbed one of the doors with his dirty, bloody hand. Suha's head was spinning, and she asked Lee Ji-ho not to interfere with this and not to do anything reckless, whether it was a human or a monster. Lee Ji-ho didn't understand how they could ignore this and asked the girl if she had any guesses as to what kind of person it was. But Suhi said that she had no way of knowing who her neighbors were. She noted that it would be even stranger if she knew everyone who lived in such a large building, and she added that as far as she remembered, that guy shouldn't have moved. Suki suggested thinking about how to get out of this building alive. They were sticking their noses where they shouldn't. After that, Suhi listened carefully just in case. She said that the monsters and that man were moving in different directions. If they had suddenly crossed paths, they would definitely have been heard. But no sounds followed. Lee Ji-ho noticed that Suki kept changing the topic of conversation without her noticing and didn't know what to do, because one careless word and they could have a big fight. But Lee Ji-ho understood that Suhi would not tell her anything just like that, and she tried to find some way out of this situation. Still, Lee Ji-ho decided to leave all these showdowns for a while. They didn't even know what exactly was in the elevator. And even if it was a psycho, the monsters wouldn't have let him just get to her group. Lee Ji-ho wondered if the psycho monster was simply avoiding other monsters and assumed that they had some kind of hierarchy. Looking at Suhi, Lee Ji-ho noticed that the girl was thinking hard about something. She soon said that there were 3 staircases leading down from them, and noted that since the building was multi-purpose, the residential and commercial floors were connected only by emergency stairs and an elevator. She explained that the stairs between the commercial floors led up to the 5th floor, and that the way the girls came and the opposite direction were not the best choice for escape. And she knew little about the central area, because everything there was destroyed. Suki emphasized that the girls should know this just in case and suggested choosing some kind of conditional signal so that they could recognize each other. Lee Ji-ho thought about this and asked what would happen if they tried to talk to the person in the elevator, but Suhi was categorically against it. She reminded him that even under normal circumstances, he would still be crazy, and it was worth imagining what he could do in the situation they all found themselves in. She noted that if suddenly this psycho tried to kill them, it would be impossible to stop him, and asked the liege whether she really thought that she would be able to come to an agreement with him, and asked him to think about the child. Lee Ji-ho nevertheless agreed with her, to which Suki noted that the girl was lucky to meet a good adult like herself, and not some kind of killer. Lee Ji-ho didn't understand why she was saying this and asked again. Suhi was surprised that this was not obvious to Lee Ji-ho and explained that some people lost their minds due to fear of monsters and turned into killers. Rumors highlighted that the killers thought they no longer had a reason to live, and therefore chose to act like monsters. Suki exhaled heavily and said that the reality, unfortunately, was exactly like that, and therefore everyone should be as careful as possible. Lee Ji-ho understood that Suhi was right on the one hand, but on the other hand, her childish naivety and kindness tried to deny it. After thinking for a bit, Lee Ji-ho emphasized that in the end they had 2 monsters behind the door, and unfortunately their territories overlapped. Suki looked at Lee Ji-ho curiously, trying to guess what she was getting at, and confirmed her words. Lee Ji-ho was distracted for a second and heard Suhi curse out loud and immediately asked what the matter was. Suki showed the screen of her phone, asking to look carefully. A notification popped up on the screen saying that there was only 5 cents left on the battery, which meant that the phone would soon turn off. And it also meant that if the phone turned off, the signal and their location would also disappear. Everyone understood this, except for little Satbel. After thinking for a bit, Lee Ji-ho clarified that they would most likely have to go downstairs. And Suhi agreed with her and noted that they had no other options left. They left the girls several bottles of water so that they wouldn't have to drag them along and so that the child would have something to drink, after which they very carefully walked out into the corridor, pressing back to back. Lee Ji-ho promised Satbel that she would return soon, and the girls should stay in this room, and if they were thirsty, drink water little by little. The child assured that she understood everything. Her face was very sad. After that, the girls went down the corridor toward the stairs to go down. Suddenly, Lee Ji-ho heard a sound and a strange sensation that made her stop. She turned to Suhi and whispered that they should wait a little, explaining that a monster should pass through this place very soon. Indeed, right in front of them, not far away, although with difficulty, one could notice that disgusting slug, which was practically transparent. Suhi was surprised by this and noted that Lee Jiho had very good hearing, which surprised Lee Jiho herself because she knew that she had good hearing but not that good. The girls carefully stepped aside and froze, letting the monster pass and continuing on their way. When the danger of the monster had passed, they continued moving towards the stairs and had already passed the landing with the elevators. Suki explained that the first block of the building started from there and noted that if that crawling scum and the unknown person had searched every inch of the commercial area, it might take them about 15 minutes to return that way. Suki suggested going down the aisle, to which she brought the girl and asked to search only 3 places, which Lee Jiho decided not to argue with. They also began to walk down the stairs quietly. Lee Jiho followed Suhi, jealous of her complete trust because, according to her, she knew this house much better. Lee Jiho asked what I wouldn't do if monsters suddenly appeared, and thought out loud that they probably should have watched their routes longer to be completely sure. At this, Suki only snorted, asking the girl not to jinx it and not bring trouble upon them. Rumor suggested using a flashlight and quickly finding a charger, but first they needed to find food. Suki reminded that their goal was to survive without unnecessary risks, and looked at the confused Lee Jiho quite seriously. Having agreed on everything, the girl entered one of the rooms. Thanks to the light from the flashlights, one could see a lot of bloodstains and streaks on the wall, which was very disturbing. The room looked more like a classroom, filled with tables with piles of papers and chairs for them. The girls immediately began to search all the boxes and drawers. A short time later, Lee Jiho happily announced that she had found a charger. Sophia was delighted to note that the students apparently forgot their chargers when they evacuated. And showing the bag they found, she added that there was also some food and suggested that they take a last look in the break room and then return back. Lee Jiho agreed with her and noted that she would hold the phone with a flashlight. But when Lee Jiho picked up the phone and shown it in the direction, she became very scared and dropped the phone from her hands. In one of the windows, she noticed a sea cucumber that was trying to get inside, apparently hearing the sounds and following them. Lee Jiho knew that it was better for her not to scream, but she was too afraid to do so, and for a moment she simply fell into a stupor. Suki didn't see what Lee Jiho saw and started talking about the installment plan for the phone that fell. Lee Jiho shouted softly, trying to warn the girls of the danger behind her. When Lee Jiho shouted at Suhi to run, the monster broke through the building. Suhi fell, but Lee Jiho caught her. Suki was horrified, not understanding what had attacked them because it happened so suddenly. The monster was destroying everything around him, trying to get to the girls. Lee Jiho, when the girls were running away, noted that they were attacked by a monster with tentacles that responded to sound, and they needed to move to a quiet place as quickly as possible. Suki screamed that she didn't understand how the two of them couldn't notice such a huge monster so close to them. They decided that it was worth going up as quickly as possible, because the monster might not be able to climb the stairs after them. Lee Jiho seemed to sense something that Suhi couldn't, and as they headed towards the door, the sensation intensified. She abruptly pulled Suki by the hand, shouting that they shouldn't have run to those doors, to which Suki shouted that the girl had gone crazy and they had no other option but to go upstairs. Suki tried to break free, arguing that they should have gotten up before the monsters ate them, but Lee Jiho pulled her in the other direction. She tried to convince Suki that she should have listened and gone to another place and pulled the girl with all her strength behind her. Suhi was even more shocked when she felt how much power was in Lee Jiho's hands. I don't understand where the girl got such power from. Lee Jiho pulled Suhi even harder and made her run, throwing out what it cost them to stop chatting. Suki was confident that she was making the right choice, although she did not understand where this confidence came from. Suki, running after Lee Jiho, very soon became even more terrified than before, seeing another danger ahead. They ran down a narrow, dark alley that turned behind one of the shops. Right on the corner of Suki, I saw the figure of a man and immediately understood who it was. It was a man who addressed Suki in a shortened form of his name. He looked terrible and seemed to have been dead for a long time. Saliva dripped from his ugly mouth, and he said that he would kill the girl. He then said it louder, almost shouting, using Gong Suhi's full name, making it impossible to mistake him for being interested in any other survivor. He was going after her. He walked slowly towards them, his head down and not showing his face. The girl stopped for a moment, realizing that she couldn't get close to him. Lee Ji-ho pushed Suhi back away from you sharply, protecting her just in case. This man did not stop and continued to assert his desire to kill Gong Suhi. Lee Ji-ho was shocked and asked Suhi if this was the person she was talking about in the elevator. Suki slapped herself in the face, noting that she still couldn't understand why a sea cucumber was hanging around near them. And as it turns out, it was all because of this idiot. And she thought out loud what would have happened if this person had not wandered around the house and made noise. Lee Ji-ho looked at her and did not understand anything. Moreover, she did not understand what noise she was talking about and decided to ask about it. Suki said that this man walked around and screamed so loudly that her head was already splitting. Indeed, this zombie did not stop and mumbled about murder, but Lee Ji-ho was even more surprised by this, because for her, this man was barely mumbling anything under his breath, and it was strange that Suha was getting a headache from this. Suki shook again and clutched her head, noting that she would soon die either from this sea cucumber or from this muttering bastard. The girl could barely stand on her feet and began to back away in confusion in order to maintain her balance and not fall. Behind them, the tentacles of the monster had already appeared, and it was only a little while before it could pounce on the girls. Lee Ji-ho tried to come up with some kind of plan for them to escape. She was completely shocked by the situation they found themselves in. Suki couldn't come to her senses as this zombie approached, and she felt worse and worse. After looking around for a bit, Lee Ji-ho finally came up with something. She needed to act decisively and quickly. She grabbed Suki by the shoulders and tried to get her attention. When the girl looked at her, she asked her to run, promising to hold off the zombies. But Suki didn't like this at all, and she considered it an absolutely crazy and dangerous idea. She screamed that Lee Ji-ho had completely lost her mind, but she asked her to pull herself together and noted that she should have run on the count of 3. Lee Ji-ho emphasized that Suhi should have just done what she said, although the girl strongly denied this idea. Lee Ji-ho didn't pay attention to what Suhi was saying and how she doubted her plan and simply pushed her away and started the countdown. On the count of 3, Suhi finally ran, deciding to trust Lee Ji-ho, but in any case, she had no other option. Lee Ji-ho rushed at the zombie guy and pushed him, trying to knock him down. He didn't look like he was, and in fact, he wasn't very strong, and unable to stay on his feet, he fell. Lee Ji-ho jumped back in time, and the sea cucumber that was already sneaking up on her from behind passed by. Suhi watched in bewilderment at what Lee Ji-ho was doing. She couldn't believe her eyes that this girl was so brave, agile, and also smart. I was surprised that such a small girl had so much strength, but this thought was interrupted by Lee Ji-ho, who asked her to get up quickly. Lee Ji-ho ran up to her and asked her to move faster, while both monsters were distracted, and Suhi agreed. The monster had not calmed down yet, but fortunately he changed his attention and left the girls alone. Lee Ji-ho and Suhi ran upstairs in front of everyone, and as soon as they got into the apartment, they slammed the door behind them. Ham Satbel was worried when she saw the girls in such a state. They could not even speak properly, trying to catch their breath. Suki, having regained her breath a little, asked Lee Ji-ho what had happened to her, but the girl did not understand what was being discussed. Suki highlighted the moment when Lee Ji-ho threw that guy. Suki also noticed the moment when they went upstairs, and Lee Ji-ho seemed to know where the one who splashed everything around would be. Suki sincerely did not understand where Lee Ji-ho got such strength and intuition from. But Lee Ji-ho herself didn't understand what had happened to her. She didn't really notice any changes in herself. The girl blushed and replied that she felt it that way. Suki raised her eyebrows and asked if the girl was a hunter and noted that she looked damn strong and as if she was one. Lee Ji-ho waved her hands. I'm trying to convince Suhi that she wasn't a hunter. I'll emphasize that if she was one, then she wouldn't have to go through all this. Suhi asked Lee Ji-ho to get them out of this house as soon as possible if she really was a hunter. Lee Ji-ho thought about her superpowers at that moment. Her thoughts were interrupted by Suki, who noted that for some reason she felt very cold and even began to grind her teeth. When Lee Ji-ho turned to her, she saw that the girl had crouched down and was shaking, huddled as tightly as possible in an attempt to somehow warm herself up. Lee Ji-ho immediately ran up to her trying to make sure she was okay. Suhi assumed that this happened to her because the tension was gone and asked if Lee Ji-ho was cold. But Lee Ji-ho wasn't cold and was very surprised by what was happening to Suhi when they were generally in a warm room. Deciding that there was no time to waste, Lee Ji-ho declared that Suhi had to be completely honest with her from that moment on. Lee Ji-ho explained that she had already seen people like her, but Suhi was surprised and asked me to explain. Lee Jiho noted that the girl mentioned her head was falling apart when she met that person and said it was because of her voice, while the guy barely whispered. Lee Jiho also emphasized that she grew up in an area full of Rift survivors. Among the Rift survivors, there were those who were affected by mental monsters and reacted in the same way as Suhi. Jill assumed that if she was right, Suhi would continue to experience traumatic reactions until she began using the mana crystal healing device. But Suki didn't know anything about this, and rising to her feet, continued to look at the girl with extreme surprise. She handed her the charger and placed it right in her palm. But Lee Jiho insisted on honesty between them so that they could all find a way to get out without suffering from that guy anymore. She suggested asking for rescue again and looking for a way out, but Suki completely drooped and continued to shake and remain silent. Lee Jiho remembered that there was talk about information about monsters that was available even to civilians inside the rift, and assumed that they would be able to find data about unknown monsters as well. Lee Jiho lightly hugged Suhi's shoulder and promised that they would definitely get out together and completely cope. Well, this excessive kindness only irritated Suki. Suhi asked if Lee Jiho was always so pushy with people, but she didn't receive any answer, only a serious look. But immediately Lee Jiho smiled and said that when she was so close to someone, it became easier for her. Together it was much easier than alone. This made Suki laugh a lot, and she noted that she was probably really lucky to meet such a partner. The boar Satbel ran up to Suki with a handkerchief and began to carefully wipe her abrasions, asking her not to get hurt again. This touched her, and she promised to tell everything. She let Ham Satbel help her wipe her face and prepared herself to tell what had happened to her. She shared her thoughts, which made it clear that nothing special had happened in this story. But Suhi also noted that even 2 mouths would not be enough to retell everything. She said that when the rift opened, the whole crowd went down. There was complete chaos around. They were pushing and shouting, preventing each other from getting out of danger. Thanks to the fact that Suhi was a little behind, she managed to avoid the invisible monster that had swallowed up all the other people. The rest, including her, could not go down any further. They had no choice but to return up. Every time they climbed up a floor, they had to fight off hordes of monsters. Everyone decided that it would be better to hide in the apartments on the residential floors, since most likely there was no one left there. The files of the dead were scattered on every staircase, and Suki had to see it all with his own eyes. Blood stood in puddles in every corridor. There was nothing left to do but walk straight through these puddles. Suki noted that it was like a real hell. She really felt like she was in hell. And at about this time, something strange happened, which is what Suki was leading to. The screams had already died down by that time, and there had been no light for a long time, and the whole house was plunged into darkness. Suki tried to move along with everyone and did not lag behind. It seemed that the acute danger had already passed. For some time, her memory simply persistently erased, and she remembered only the voice of the guy who called her by name. He sat on the floor, leaning his back on the shift, and asked what was going on around her. Suki remembered his face well. When she looked at him then, she noticed that he was sitting with his eyes closed and replied that she herself did not understand anything. And then something began to crawl towards him from the darkness and seemed to fit into his skin. She had never seen anything like it, and couldn't even describe what it looked like. This horror quickly consumed the body of the guy, who did not even try to resist and apparently did not feel pain, because he suddenly became silent. Suki and another survivor approached this guy who was being devoured by an unknown monster. The guy asked what it was, having never seen anything like it before. Suki grimaced and replied that she had never heard of such a thing. No one had ever told her about such a thing. The remaining survivors decided to go up to another floor, because it was quite scary to stay in that place. While Suhi of the others did not immediately feel how the hand of that guy reached for her leg. I felt some kind of tickling. The girl kicked her foot and turning around saw that the guy literally crawled to her and tried to grab her. He whispered barely audibly and asked for help. It turned out that he was still in his consciousness. It was impossible to look at him without horror. His whole body was covered with some kind of disgusting tumors, and he tried with all his might to grab onto the dry ones. Vadim had a similar tumor in his eye, and the other one was bloodshot. He begged for help, but it was scary to even touch him. Suki was momentarily stunned with fear. She couldn't even imagine if she would be able to escape from this. Suki jumped back, and the infected guy just slammed to the floor. From the blows, all the tumors on his body seemed to burst. Blood sprayed in all directions, and the air was filled with some kind of foul-smelling steam. Everyone reflexively covered their faces and looked at this guy with fear, afraid to move. Suki then asked everyone to close their mouths and noses. Let us note that no one knew what could happen. But Suki found that almost all the people she ran with lost consciousness and fell to the floor. She struggled to hold herself together and begged the others not to fall and stay on their feet. Very quickly, the guy's body exploded. Everything around was covered in unknown liquid and tumor parts. It didn't even look like a human body. Listening to this story, Lee Ji-ho could not stand it and asked to wait a minute to clarify how many monsters there were in the building where they were. Suki replied that she didn't know for sure, because then all she was capable of was desperately crawling out the door. She had neither the time nor the opportunity to think about what was happening inside. She noted that it was unlikely that she really should have saved that person in such a situation. Even if she had returned, it would have simply led to even more victims. Lee Ji-ho saw that the girl was not feeling well and asked if everything was okay. Suhi, stroking the head of Ham Satbel, who was almost asleep on her lap, replied that she just wanted to rest a little. She complained about her head, which was buzzing madly, and asked to wake her up in an hour. Lee Ji-ho couldn't fit all this information in her head, promised to follow and wake the girl up in an hour. Suhi lay down on the floor there and, hugging Ham Satbel, covered herself with a blanket and immediately fell asleep. Lee Ji-ho decided not to lie down and sat down not far from them, taking the phone in her hands. She looked at her reflection on the screen and thought about everything she had heard. She was afraid that she too had turned into a monster like that man. She understood that she should have died then, but she was still alive, and it was impossible to say that everything was okay with her. She had never heard of anyone dying in a rift and then coming back to life. Even at the Hunter Academy, they hadn't told her about it. These thoughts haunted her and filled her with a lot of fear. Unexpectedly for her, the phone in her hands, which was connected to charging, began to charge. The girl jumped up from surprise and joy. This was very good news because the phone would charge and turn on. They could apply for rescue again. When the phone turned on, the girl first tried to open the navigation and really hoped that at least someone else besides them had survived. Well, when she opened the app, there was a notification about the lack of signal, which did not give her the opportunity to see other survivors and make herself known. She knew that this could happen, but it still upset her very much and shattered another small piece of hope for her salvation. She understood that the hunters couldn't come to a place where there were almost no survivors, and they couldn't even send out another application. She tried again and again. When the network appeared, she immediately sent her coordinates with the thoughts that it was not just necessary to hold out as long as possible until the hunters arrived. She reassured herself that the most important thing was to just sit quietly so that the monsters wouldn't gather around and attack. A friend. This strange feeling that she experienced before returned. All thoughts were only about one thing. She began to think about that transparent monster that was walking somewhere on the floor. She had the feeling that she could literally see his trajectory of movement and his exact location. She didn't like this feeling at all, and she realized that something was going wrong. Images of other monsters also appeared in her mind, although they were more vague than the previous one. She had a clear idea that all the monsters were gathering together, but she did not understand why. Lee Ji-ho decided that there was no time to delay any longer, since she was sure that she was not mistaken. She began to wake up Suhi, who could hardly understand what was being asked of her. Suki got up and was indignant that she had just fallen asleep and was immediately woken up. But Lee Ji-ho immediately declared that they should have left the apartment immediately. Suki, hearing this, tried to find out what exactly the girl was talking about and stood up, and Ham Satbel immediately stood up after her. Lee Ji-ho, very worried, explained that they urgently needed to move to another place. She handed Suki a piece of pipe, noting that it might be useful to her, but Suki explained to her that it all looked very strange and the girl should explain everything normally. Lee Ji-ho handed the phone to Ham Satbel, who was still asleep, standing up straight, and said that all the monsters were gathering around the house. Suhi, hearing this, woke up completely and worriedly asked how Ji-ho knew about this. Lee Ji-ho asked her not to worry, stating that she had a plan. But Suhi didn't understand what she meant, reminding her that monsters didn't cross the boundaries of their territories. Lee Ji-ho once again asked Suhi to calm down and listen carefully, noting that she could not explain properly, but still felt that the monsters were approaching. Suki panicked and yelled at the girl that she was going crazy. and then noted that she should have thought that Jiho could also have suffered from that mushroom. Lee Jiho tried to convince her that they wouldn't be able to find a safe place again, and told her that she sent a distress signal through the Hunter's app. But Suhi refused to go anywhere. She directly stated that she did not trust the girl and decided to stay where she was and wait for rescue, and pointed out that Jiho could die alone if she wanted to. She wanted to add something else, but seemed to freeze, breaking off in mid-sentence. Her gaze became glassy. Suki disappeared into her own consciousness and did not react to the world around her. She started shaking incredibly hard again. Lee Jiho understood that there was little time and begged the girl to urgently go down before the monsters reached this floor. She emphasized that if they left right now, they would not encounter monsters until the very first floor, but Suki remained silent. In her head, a picture suddenly appeared of herself falling to the floor, covered in ugly mushroom tumors like that guy. She clearly saw what could happen to her if she did not return to the real world. This immediately brought her back to herself, and she suddenly jumped up and ran towards the exit of the room. She screamed that she couldn't die like this and had to survive at any cost, frightening Lee Jiho and Ham Satbel, who nevertheless immediately ran after her. Suki grabbed the handle of the front door and fussily pulled it in an attempt to open it, saying that she would never die. She ran out into the corridor and quickly reached the stairs and began to descend, continuing to mutter under her breath that she would never allow anything bad to happen. Lee Jiho, with Ham Satbel in her arms, couldn't keep up with her and shouted after her, trying to stop the girl. But Suki seemed to have gone mad and ran as fast as she could, not paying attention to the fact that her name was being called. Having come down the stairs, the girl rushed towards the closed door and tried to knock it down, falling on it with all her weight. The door didn't give in the first time, and Suki hit it again, putting all her strength into these pushes. She still managed to escape from the corridor, although it made a lot of noise. The doors on the other side were propped up with a lot of things. The girl fell to the floor with the door. Her emotions did not subside. She was in the wildest hysterics and could not control herself. She quickly jumped to her feet and ran on, not even thinking about the fact that Lee Jiho and Satbel were running behind her, and they needed to wait. Her goal was to get out of the house, and she wasn't going to stop until she got to him. Having reached the doors and going out onto the street, she smiled broadly, happy that she had finally gotten out of that house. She was so carried away by her obsessive thought of getting out of the house that she did not notice anything around her, not even the huge monster that was walking straight towards her. When she noticed a huge shadow above her, it was already too late. Lee Jiho was still trying to catch up with her and begging her to stop and come back to them. But when she ran out into the street after Suhi, she realized that there was nothing she could do. Suki smiled even in the last moment of her life. With such a smile, she asked Lee Jiho, or maybe herself, whether it was a sin to want to survive. The next moment, a huge monster stepped right on her. Suka's madness could not be restored by anyone, and it destroyed her. Lee Jiho watched this scene from the side with horror. She was dumbfounded by what she saw and only hugged Satbel tighter. Blood splashes reached them too. It all seemed completely unreal, especially for Satbel, who was too young to fully comprehend everything that was happening around her. The girl was very scared and screamed. Lee Jiho covered her eyes and asked her not to look and stop crying. For her, this picture was just as scary as for this girl, but she could control her emotions and knew that now they would have to save themselves together. The monsters immediately heard the girl's cry and became very interested in it. There were dogs, spiders, huge centipedes, and other completely ugly creatures just waiting for their prey. Satbel couldn't calm down and, burying her face in Lee Jiho's neck, continued to cry loudly. She called for her mother and talked about how scared she was. But this only attracted more and more monsters to him and Lee Jiho. They were very close, and the survivors had too little time to escape. A shadow fell across Lee Jiho's face from the huge hand of one of the monsters that was reaching right behind her. She couldn't believe that she would die exactly like her father. She hugged Satbel tighter, trying to give her at least a small sense of security in the last seconds of their lives. She didn't want to die, especially not so senselessly. She barely audibly called for help and, closing her eyes, pressed herself against the girl. She cowered in fear and continued to beg for help, already feeling that the monster's hand was very close to her. She felt this slow, disgusting touch of a monster, who, to her regret, was so slow that she had to feel these endlessly long seconds of horror. But when the monster was just a few centimeters away from her, they came to her aid and killed this monster. A girl who apparently was a hunter appeared right out of the monster pit. She stopped near Lee Ji-ho and Ham Satbel and noted that a survivor had been found. Having dealt with the monsters, the girl reached for her glasses to take them off. After the hunter took off her glasses, she noted that an unregistered awakened person had also been discovered. The rescue operation began. Lee Ji-ho was incredibly scared, surprised that she was still alive, and incredibly happy about it. The hunter smiled at the two of them, noting that I didn't believe that the girls could hold out for so long. They were very lucky. The huntress looked at the frightened Lee Ji-ho and little Ham Satbel and offered to return the girls home. She smiled and noted that she would take them herself, and asked them not to worry because they were now safe. There were no more monsters around. They had all been killed by the hunters, and now it was really possible to fall apart a little. The huntress smiled sweetly and wiped the monster's blood from her face. She was very happy that she managed to save 2 lives. The girls were immediately taken to one of the hospitals to make sure that their health was not in danger. The hospital was crowded, as was typical for such a place. Many of the patients were victims of the rift. Lee Ji-ho was dressed in a hospital gown and sat on a chair in the hallway waiting for her appointment. The radio in the hallway broadcast news of 18-year-old Lee Ji-ho awakening as a hunter through a recent rift. The news said that the girl made headlines because she protected a child inside the rift. Now both the Hunters Association and the Citizen followed her further steps with great interest. A nurse came up to the girl and apologized for her mother. The girl shuddered slightly and listened very attentively to the news. When she saw that there was a medical staff member standing in front of her, she relaxed a little. The nurse asked if the funeral had gone well. Lee Ji-ho replied that everything went well, but emphasized that she was in a daze and was unsure whether she could properly see off her mother. The nurse handed the girl her passport and discharge documents, but did not answer. She explained that her attending physician was already aware of this, and that the girl should have simply handed over the documents at the check-in desk upon exiting. Lee Ji-ho took the documents and thanked the nurse. Finally, the nurse said that Satbel had safely reached her grandmother's house, and this made Lee Ji-ho a little happy. She asked if this was true, and the nurse confirmed it and noted that it was all thanks to her. The nurse emphasized that the girl had done a truly amazing job and thought about the child's safety even in that terrible situation. Lee Ji-ho laughed at this, not knowing how else to react. The nurse noted that she was speaking quite seriously, and not everyone could make such a decision. Lee Ji-ho was embarrassed and thanked the nurse again. When the nurse left, another girl approached her and asked if Ji-ho was hungry, which scared her again. Looking at the girl, she recognized the same huntress who helped her get out of the rift. The huntress offered Ji-ho to have lunch together and showed the bag in her hand, noting that she had ordered food from a famous restaurant. "You looked really amazing." The plate was beautifully laid out with noodles with red fish, greens, and a handful of vegetables. Lee Ji-ho was very pleasantly surprised by this meal. The huntress told her that most of the awakening tests had already been completed, so she was being discharged, and also noted that all the paperwork had also been taken care of. The huntress really hoped that Lee Ji-ho would like it, but the girl was only thinking about how much food she saw above her plate and how delicious it was. After Ji-ho's notification, the hunter dressed up with documents and stated that she had been appointed as her temporary guardian, to which the girl nevertheless paid attention and was very surprised. The huntress explained that many who awakened after sudden rifts experienced unstable energy surges, and this explained the numerous examinations that Lee Ji-ho had to undergo. The huntress said that they didn't find any problems with Ji-ho and that she wouldn't need isolation. The huntress smiled and said that Ji-ho was officially discharged safely and suggested that she eat in peace while it was still warm. The hunters, watching Lee Ji-ho eat his lunch, noted with a smile that she was very happy with the girl's good appetite. Seeing the answering smile, the huntress decided it was time to introduce herself. Her name was Im Bohan. She said that she was a first-generation hunter, although she was already retired, and she was temporarily sent to a recent rift, and that is how she found Ji-ho. The huntress asked if Lee Ji-ho was feeling better. She was still a little stiff and awkward. She replied that she was a little sore, but otherwise she felt fine. This pleased the huntress, and she assumed that the girl could have gotten very hungry on just the hospital food, when after waking up, her appetite increased greatly. Lee Ji-ho admired her first good meal. Then Lee Ji-ho understood why the huntress had brought her so much food. Boehm told them that the girl's body was now using energy differently and it should have become more acute. She advised her to eat more. The girl no longer smiled, but on the contrary, her face changed expression. Lee Ji-ho mumbled a little, choosing her words, and noted that she had been in the hospital for a long time. The huntress bowed a little, waiting for the girl to say more. Lee Ji-ho asked about the bill for the treatment, and it was clear from the huntress's face that she was not going to take any money. Lee Ji-ho noted that her parents were dead and suddenly fell silent. The huntress did not understand what the girl wanted to say and did not know how to react to her words. But she still said that this was not something a child should think about. I tried to calm the girl down. Im Bohem asked her not to worry, explained that the state covered all the expenses associated with registering the awakened, and therefore Lee Ji-ho did not owe anything, which surprised her very much. But with surprise came relief, and she said that in that case, she would quickly finish everything, since they tried so hard for her. One girl started on a new dish and the hunter turned to her again. She told the girl that it would be best if she lived there with her for some time. Lee Ji-ho didn't even know how to react to this because she thought that they would provide her with some kind of dormitory, or she would have to return home. The huntress noted that she would become her legal guardian for a time. She added that she knew her entire situation, and that a guardian would be needed until she completed her basic training and hunter registration. She also added that, in addition, the area where Lee Ji-ho lived was severely damaged due to a fault, and since she found her and registered her, the state appointed her as her guardian. After listening to the huntress, the girl felt much better and smiled again. The huntress let it be known that if the girls were uncomfortable or she didn't want it, she could always say so. But Lee Ji-ho waved her hands and began to talk fussily about how everything suited her. The huntress smiled sweetly and, noting that it was not every day that one could meet an experienced and caring guardian, glanced at the person next to her. There were a lot of shopping bags standing near her chair. When Lee Ji-ho saw this, her eyes immediately sparkled. She was incredibly happy. She couldn't believe that all this was prepared just for her. Her emotions were off the charts, but they were incredibly pleasant. For a very long time, no one had given her such great gifts or shown her such kindness except her late mother. Lee Ji-ho glanced at the empty plates that were left from her dinner, and her emotions grew even stronger. Lee Ji-ho remembered sitting in her room, fiddling with her phone in her hands, thinking about everything that was happening to her. She read again the message from her father's friend who showed up after the news about her and offered to be by her side, emphasizing many times that she had become a hunter. Lee Ji-ho thought that neither he nor her aunt had appeared when she was in trouble, and now they were writing only because she had woken up. This really hurt her. Thinking about this, she felt again a very strange feeling that told her that everything was for the best. She was again distracted from her thoughts by the huntress, who asked again whether such conditions were suitable for her. Im Bohem noted that she knew that this was only their second meeting, but she hoped that the girl would be able to trust her because she wanted to be someone she could rely on. The huntress really hoped that the girl would agree to live with her. Lee Ji-ho tried to believe that these words were happening to her and turned out to be something unreal. And we looked with a very slight smile at the huntress, who patiently waited for an answer and continued to smile. Lee Ji-ho agreed to Im Bohem's proposal, and after being discharged, she trusted her completely. Changing into new clothes and going outside, Lee Ji-ho stretched with great pleasure. It was incredibly comfortable and very joyful. The huntress emphasized that the girl really suited her new clothes. Lee Ji-ho was a little embarrassed and asked again if it really suited her. The huntress said that when she first saw her, she was completely disheveled, and therefore she had to buy clothes for the new year. Lee Ji-ho smiled and thanked her and replied that everything was very comfortable and easy. But then Lee Ji-ho felt awkward because the fabric of her new clothes looked very expensive and she was afraid to imagine how much it cost. Throwing these thoughts aside, Lee Ji-ho asked the huntress what she could call her, to which Im Bohem chuckled and thought for a second. She smiled and asked to call her huntress aunt. It was a joke. The huntress said that the girl can call her whatever she wants. Lee Ji-ho suggested calling her sister, but the huntress replied that it sounded very strange. Lee Ji-ho asked why, and the huntress replied that she had a conscience and couldn't allow a high school girl to call her sister because she was much older. Im Bohem showed Lee Ji-ho her ID card, which also included her date of birth. Lee Ji-ho was shocked when she saw the date, because the huntress was 40 years old, although she did not look her age at all. The huntress explained that the awakened ones had a slower aging process, and that was definitely one of the benefits. Lee Ji-ho remembered what she really wanted to know and decided that this was the perfect time to ask the question. She asked the huntress if it was really necessary to die in order to awaken, which left Im Bohem a little confused. But it was definitely true. Lee Ji-ho didn't understand why the others didn't return, because so many people died that day. The huntress looked very confused by such questions. She thought for a bit, but replied that if awakening were that simple, the whole world would be full of hunters. This actually made a lot of sense, because the hunters in the world were very talented people who were respected by everyone. Im Bohem asked Lee Ji-ho not to blame herself with guilt because she did everything she could in that situation. The huntress hugged the girl and emphasized that she tried very hard and everyone noticed it. When it was already dark, Lee Ji-ho was still in the hospital. They walked with the huntress for a short time and she went about her business. Lee Ji-ho was packing her things that were in the ward and preparing to be discharged. She stepped away from the bag and looked around, noting that there was still very little left to pack. She remembered that the huntress told her that she had some business to do and that she would pick her up in the evening. She asked her to get ready calmly and read the book that subsequently attracted the girl. She said that the book explained why the monster from the rift was drawn to her and also other things that might be interesting to her. Lee Ji-ho glanced at the book and thought about how Miss Bowen didn't deny that awakening could be related to death. She wondered whether awakening could be called just luck, and she decided to leaf through the book a little in the hope that she would be able to find at least some answers. The first lines of the book were insults and support for those who became awakened, which made Lee Ji-ho a little nervous. She managed to read that the wounds received in the rifts could only be healed by magic and estuary devices. I can explain why she woke up and stayed alive. The book wrote that even minor injuries could lead to death if not properly examined. Lee Ji-ho read to the newcomers who still did not know how to control their alien energy, and at this point she stopped and thought. After the page, it was said that if someone encountered an unregistered awakened of this type, it was worth immediately setting up an energy barrier. She remembered how tragically her sister Suki died, and under what circumstances it happened. Lee Ji-ho shuddered at the thought that this could have happened because of her. The more she read, the more anxiety arose inside her, and she needed to find out the answers to everything that was troubling her. Soon, Lee Ji-ho was taken to the Hunters Association by Hunter Im Bohem for additional examinations to clarify some nuances. There, they were surprised that her indicators turned out to be normal. She had many different suction cups attached to her that measured her body parameters. But the examiner did not understand how such characteristics could exist at all, and noted that they were even impossible to measure. He had never seen an awakened person with such numbers. At these words, Lee Ji-ho shrank in her chair, not understanding what this could mean. Soon, Mrs. Bohem came to see her, and noted with a smile that the girl was apparently very strong, considering her almost top level. By that time, Lee Ji-ho had already managed to imagine a lot of bad things and, very surprised by such news, asked if the huntress was absolutely sure of this. Mrs. Bohem glanced over her results and replied that she was sure and explained that usually people had a maximum of 1 or 2 abilities after awakening, but she had both physical enhancement and detection and sense of danger. In addition, Lee Ji-ho was found to have a powerful manifestation energy and even a bit of a mental barrier, and even though she had a low inclination, she could heal. Lee Ji-ho sat silently, trying to believe it, but the huntress, ahead of her answer, assured her that she was not joking and considered the girl one of the top, because even among the first generation of geniuses, there were no such as her. Lee Ji-ho was truly amazed, because just recently she was racking her brains over how to get a job as an assistant to the awakened. She spent a lot of time studying everything related to hunters and awakened ones, preparing for exams, which she was very afraid of failing. But now it turned out that she herself was one of them, although it still seemed unreal to her, despite the fact that they had already managed to scan her and confirm it. Miss Bohem noted that, in any case, the Hunters and the Awakened Alliance should have definitely paid attention to her. But Lee Ji-ho could never imagine that she would be involved in the alliance and looked questioningly at her guardian. The lady asked her not to worry, noting that the Union simply loved to persuade, and added that there was a reason why they were called that. The huntress said with a smile that it was not for nothing that they were called the Association of Rags, because most of the awakened were strangely soft and docile, which is what Ji-ho was. After this, the huntress glanced at her watch and headed out of the office, declaring that this examination was completed, although they had not finished yet. Before the huntress could leave the door, Lee Jiho called out to her and she turned around with a kind smile on her face, expecting a question. Lee Jiho wondered if she would become a hunter like her since she was awakened and asked why the Awakened Alliance needed her. The lady did not stop smiling and decided to briefly explain this point to Lee Jiho. She said that awakened ones could choose whether they wanted to live as hunters or lead normal lives, and some like herself, and Lee Jiho herself had incredible abilities, while others not so much. Of course, the former most often chose the path of a hunter for the sake of money or benefits. But still, many chose an ordinary life because of the trauma experienced in the rifts. After this, the lady's face became more serious, and she indicated that if there was an opportunity to return to a past life, then it was worth choosing it, especially if the family was alive and there was a home to return to. After this, the ladies cut off the conversation, noting that the time had almost come and looked at Lee Jiho. The lady headed out of the office, explaining that they needed to move to another place for the next stage. After these words, Lee Jiho felt an unusual sensation for herself. Then the huntress took Lee Jiho to test her physical abilities and warned that the girl should not be afraid of anything, and everything went well. And after, already in the hall, the mistress asked the girl to take a step back. Lee Jiho was tired of guessing what might happen next minute as the huntress began counting down. Right in front of them, in the middle of the hall, a portal appeared, which was accompanied by lightning and a feeling of powerful energy. This phenomenon frightened Lee Jiho, because she had never seen anything like it before. The leader of the group, Park Chang-min, a user of spatial movement, emerged from the portal. The huntress noted that they had little time, so they should immediately head to the Awakened Registration Center. Park Chang-min approached the girls and smilingly asked Lee Jiho if she felt sick. He put his hand on her shoulder, waiting for an answer. Lee Jiho was confused and stuttered, saying that she had never noticed that she got motion sickness. Park Chang-min touched the hunter's shoulder as well. After that, the space around her began to rapidly change. Lee Jiho felt you very strangely and told the hunter about it, who, smiling, explained that when spatial users activated their powers, waves were felt. The huntress noted that as an awakened person, she would eventually be able to resist movement if she wanted to, and she shouldn't worry about it, because she could learn everything over time. Park Chang-min noted that he was pleased to meet the awakened Lee Jiho, and she reciprocated. He said that the girl saw in front of her the official department for supporting the awakened, in which they analyze the abilities of the awakened and help them choose the appropriate path of study. He emphasized that this place has always been open to the awakened, and after registration is completed, they will explain in detail how everything works. When Lee Jiho asked what registration meant, Park Chang-min explained that it could be considered as receiving an identity card, and each awakened person had to register their unique energy wave. The lady noted that this was the most tedious stage since paperwork was always tedious, and nothing could be done about it. After that, Park Chang-min extended his hand to Lee Jiho for a handshake. He noted that he had not introduced himself properly, and, having given his name, said that he was the leader of a group from the official department for supporting the awakened and that they would see each other often so they should greet each other properly. The lady warned him that if he tried to do anything suspicious with the child, he would become a corpse. After that, Park Chang-min and Lee Jiho shook hands. Park Chang-min countered that he had no intention of doing anything suspicious, but simply wanted to introduce himself properly before getting down to business. The lady asked Lee Jiho to be careful with this guy, because he was the type to immediately grab newly awakened ones if he thought they were useful. Park Chang-min was a little freaked out that he was introduced like that. The huntress pointed out that he had already fooled many people, but Park Chang-min objected that he had never made a bad offer. This small dispute made Lee Jiho smile, but she did not understand what was going on. Miss Boehm whispered into Lee Jiho's ear that Park Chang-min was just a greedy guy who had no understanding of emotions and couldn't read the atmosphere, and that was why the two of them didn't get along. Park Chung-min tried to explain that he was simply evaluating the newly awakened and trying to find the best path for them and was not trying to lead people away. But Im Bohem was skeptical of these explanations. The huntress emphasized that in any case, Jiho was a survivor of the rift incident, and Park Chang-min couldn't just throw her into work without even finding out what she was capable of. Park Chang-min. But it did say that humans were social creatures, and a sense of belonging and connection with others was the key to returning to normal life. Finally, he said that it was up to the girl to decide, and she had the right to choose whatever she wanted. The huntress nodded and asked him again not to interfere too much in her life. Park Chung-min didn't say anything to this, but it was clear that he was standing there very dissatisfied with the dialogue that had taken place. He looked at his watch. He said that he had to discuss the rest with the huntress alone and asked for privacy. But the lady asked if this matter could wait, after which Park Chang-min emphasized that this was a critical case of rift. Not being delighted, the huntress decided to go and talk to him anyway, since it was necessary. She turned to Lee Ji-ho and smiled at her and asked her to wait a little, promising that she would return soon. Lee Ji-ho took it well and waved her hand and smiled back. There were two guys standing next to her who were discussing something heatedly. From their words, you could tell that something terrible had happened, because they were talking about their fear and that everything was over. Once Lee Ji-ho was alone, they showed her attention and asked if she was a new temporary awakened. Lee Ji-ho was a little shy and smiled at them. A guy stood right in front of her very close and noted that he was pleased to meet her and smiled, which greatly embarrassed her. She greeted him and asked who he was. He explained that he too was temporarily awakened, and upon hearing that another unregistered awakened had appeared, he simply wanted to say hello and look at her face. This made the girl a little nervous, but she decided not to ask what he meant and simply nodded to him. He extended his hand to her and introduced himself as So Sang-won. The girl extended her hand in response and said her name, still not understanding what this guy wanted from her, noted that in his opinion, there was only one like that, but he was very happy to learn of her existence. He said that he trained in another center, but transferred to this department after the rift was closed. Since his assigned hunter was always busy, he was very lonely. At the same time, he did not let go of the girl's hand at all, in her palm in his. Lee Ji-ho thought to herself that something was wrong, and removed her hand and said that she came to the department with her guardian. Seo Sang-won smiled and remembered out loud that those who woke up at about the same time usually trained together and assumed that most likely they would both be assigned to the same group. Looking at his strangely smiling face, Lee Ji-ho said that she didn't know anything about it and assumed that apparently a whole mountain would come to teach. After that, there was a very awkward pause in their conversation and they just looked at each other in silence. Lee Ji-ho decided to interrupt her and promised that the next time she saw him, she would definitely come up to say hello, to which he replied that this was the reason he approached her. He handed her a business card with his contact information and asked her to contact him if she needed anything, and quickly left. Finally, he said that he would wait for her message and asked her to write to him. Lee Ji-ho was left completely confused, holding this business card in her hands. She glanced again at So Sang-won, who was walking too slowly about his business and kept turning back to her and waving his hand with a wide smile. After this unexpected meeting, Lee Ji-ho looked around the department and decided to sit down in the waiting area. Finally, Mrs. Boehm returned and immediately asked how long she had been waiting for her. Boehm asked them if anything strange had happened while she was away. Lee Ji-ho said that she met a guy who said that in a similar situation he would like to be in touch with her. Park Chang-min immediately recognized him and said that he had awakened and did not need such strong stabilization as Ji-ho and was already at the training stage. Park Chang-min noted that he most likely did not try to do anything suspicious, to which the lady said with a smile that she would quickly knock him out if he did try. Park Chang-min did not like this joke very much. They got into an argument again. Park Chang-min was indignant that he never said anything he didn't think, and for a short moment, and not as if they forgot about Lee Ji-ho's existence, trying to sort things out. The huntress was already standing with the business card that So Sang-won gave her. I note that Ji-ho was a schoolgirl, and she didn't need adult romance yet, and noted that after awakening, any series has the ability to be born somewhere. She called the awakened one's seedless watermelon and immediately looked away. It was already evening outside and time flew by very quickly. The lady immediately headed for the exit, suggesting that the girl go home already. Lee Ji-ho asked what was about the training of the awakened. Mrs. Boehm said that it was already too late and they would deal with her another time, since the girl had not really rested in a normal house after the break. Lee Ji-ho thought that it was really true. She hadn't been in a normal home environment for a long time. When they entered the huntress's house, Lee Ji-ho's mouth immediately dropped open in surprise. The entire apartment simply sparkled with beauty. The Bohemians had a black and beige apartment. The renovation was fairly fresh. The apartment was furnished with modern furniture and decor items. Lee Jiho couldn't take her eyes off her and turned her head as if she was enchanted. The huntress said that she moved her things to her room and asked her to just say if she needed anything. Lee Jiho couldn't come to her senses because she really liked the apartment in which she would be living in the near future, and it was completely different from the house in which she lived before. She was very happy that such things were happening to her, and that she had such support from Im Bohem, and finally, after a long time, she could just relax and go to sleep in her own room. It was already very late and it was time to go to bed, but first I needed to get my bearings a little and look around the apartment. Lee Jiho stood rooted to the spot, unable to believe that she was actually in such a beautiful house. She saw how everything around sparkled, how modern the furniture was, and how tastefully the apartment was furnished. Mrs. Boehm saw how delighted the girl was, and smiled contentedly at the fact that she was able to please her. She suggested that Lee Jiho go for a walk after dinner, noting that physical activity was a good idea, but sometimes it was worth just walking. The lady approached the girl and, pointing to one of the doors in the corridor, explained that her room was there. Lee Jiho, without hiding her delight, shared that it was the first time she found herself in such a big house, which greatly surprised the lady. After passing through one of the rooms, the girl became very interested in her, and the lady told her that this was a spare room, and sometimes they entered through the window. So in this room, they left the door to the veranda open. Lee Jiho was even more surprised because they were on the 11th floor. Bohem laughed at them, explaining that among the awakened, the ability to fly was actually quite common. She gave her slippers and led her along to show her the room she would be living in. Open the door, letting the girl into the room. The lady repeated once again that if Jiho needed anything, she should just say. The huntress asked her not to be shy, noting that it was not a problem and she just wanted to help her. Lee Jiho felt very embarrassed and constrained, but sincerely thanked the huntress. She felt very awkward because she understood how many of her resources Mrs. Boehm had invested in her. Memories from the past came back to her mind. She turned her head looking around the room but couldn't take even a step. She was truly shocked and didn't know what to do. She told the huntress that ever since she woke up, she felt like her emotions weren't as strong as before. The lady thought that Lee Jiho didn't like her room, noting how she tried to arrange everything and suggested that she could redo everything. Jiho waved her hands because the huntress misunderstood her and said that it was not about that. She smiled awkwardly and shared that she simply didn't feel anything. I understood how wonderful everything around was and she should be pleased. Lee Jiho shared that she felt like her words didn't make any sense, which left the lady a little confused. Aim Bohem, thanks to her abilities, was able to scan the girl and noticed that there was some kind of electric cloud around her. This meant that the girl was still very tense and therefore could not show her emotions properly. She told the girl that one moment of peace was not enough to get rid of all this. She touched Lee Jiho and shared that it seemed to her that the girl was unconsciously turning on psychological defense to protect herself. The huntress stroked her cheek and hair, trying to help her a little. Lee Jiho's touch really made her feel a lot better. She felt her tension easing, which was very surprising. Tears began to appear in her eyes, but she could speak with great difficulty and was able to share that she had been very scared all this time. The lady stayed close and put her arm around the girl's shoulders. Lee Jiho shared with great difficulty that she also wanted to run away when she was in the middle of the rift. She thought she was going to die anyway and wanted to be with her mother at the end. She trained so hard and prepared so much just to survive, but at that moment she couldn't do anything. She blamed herself a lot for this. I think she should have done much more and not chickened out as it turned out in the end. Lee Jiho couldn't stand it and burst into tears, noting how much she missed her mother and threw herself into the arms of the lady. After speaking out and crying, Lee Jiho felt much better. Thanks to Im Bohem's support, she was able to feel at least a little bit of relief. After this conversation, they went to the kitchen to have dinner and drink tea. All the emotions that Lee Jiho had been holding in and that were weighing on her finally came out. Her whole face was red and swollen from crying, and she felt empty inside, but it was easier to bear, too. Boehm suggested that they drink tea and go to bed, emphasizing that the state of the body was especially important for those awakened by physical effort. Lee Jiho, hearing this, noted that she did not feel tired at all, but only the burning sensation in her eyes bothered her. Boehm smiled at them and told them that when I woke up, I needed to sleep a lot. But if I didn't eat or rest like a normal person, then the girl could very quickly become exhausted. She drew attention to the fact that rest was not only a duty, but also a rule for the awakened. and said that many died or lost consciousness simply because they did not understand how much they needed rest and overloaded themselves. Lee Jiho didn't even expect that it was so important, but the huntress explained that all these rules were developed through many years of experience. The huntress advised the girl to go wash up and get ready for bed, noting that it was worth trying out her new room. After taking a sip of tea, the huntress thought about something and then turned to Lee Jiho with a question. She asked if the girl was going to become a hunter. Lee Jiho was a little confused by this question, as she did not quite understand at that moment where she should go. The girl thought about this question for a moment. After thinking for a bit, Lee Jiho replied that she would most likely try to become a hunter, since she needed to earn money and live somewhere. The huntress smiled, confirming that it was indeed possible to earn good money in this job. There was a constant shortage of people in the rifts, but she warned that this work had an obvious service life. It was very difficult to do this for a long time, and the main thing was that every time a rift opened, the hunter had to go back to that hell again. But the huntress asked the girl not to listen to only one side that was telling her something, and noted that she herself was quite against the hunter's profession, despite the fact that she became one of them. She sadly told the girl that she didn't want to see someone young like Jiho suffer. Well, it became difficult to talk about it further because neither Im Bohem nor Lee Jiho could fully explain their point of view in that dialogue. The lady stood up and asked the girl to think carefully in any case, because becoming a hunter meant getting clear advantages and equally clear disadvantages. After this, the huntress hurried the girl and sent her to bed. The lights went out everywhere in the apartment. Thanks to the full moon, the room was still very visible. The moonbeams shone directly on the face of Lee Jiho, who could not fall asleep for a long time and was tossing and turning. But still, her fatigue took its toll, and the girl closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. In the morning, she was woken up by the huntress, who apologized for this and said that when the assistant came, she needed to ask her to register the data about Jiho's body in the house system. Im Bohem looked at his watch and told the girl that the huntress Lee Juri was supposed to be coming soon as her temporary guardian. She promised that she would try to return quickly, but it might take longer than planned. Lee Jiho still couldn't come to her senses after a deep sleep. Almost without opening her eyes, she waved goodbye to the hunter and asked her to take care of herself. After which, the huntress flew out the window she had spoken about the previous evening. Then the housekeeper came and showed the girl a note which said that she could not speak, but could read, and if she needed anything, the girl could tell her. Lee Jiho didn't know how to behave, so she decided that she would follow him everywhere and be his assistant. She watched her every step, not for control but out of curiosity. Even when the assistant started vacuuming the apartment, Lee Jiho continued to follow her, not knowing where to escape from the feeling of awkwardness. In the end, the assistant couldn't stand it any longer and handed the girl a new note, which said that the girl should rest, which made her very happy. Later, Lee Jiho heard the sound of the door opening and some footsteps. The doors to the apartment opened slightly and a girl entered the hall. She introduced herself by the name of Lee Juri, explaining that she had come at the request of the huntress named Bohem. Lee Jiho looked at her guest's face carefully. She seemed to be a very self-confident girl. Lee Jiho thought that there was something about her that made her different from the other hunters, and Lee Juri immediately asked her what she thought about her, as if she had heard her thoughts. Lee Jiho was shocked, and the huntress explained that it was because she only had a physical type of ability that could only be sensed by monsters with special traits, so she mainly took on stealth missions. Lee Jiho imagined her in full hunting form and thought how cool she was. Lee Juri, walking further into the apartment, told the girl that she could think of her as a special agent. Lee Juri walked into the living room and looked at her wristwatch. Lee Jiho noticed that even her watch was very different from usual. Jiho told the girl about this and hesitated a little with her answer, thinking about how she could explain this in an accessible way. But she decided not to tell but to show, and something activated on this watch caused some energetic changes in space. Lee Jiho felt very unusual, but she thought that she had experienced something similar before. A young man emerged from the portal that had formed right in the living room of the apartment, carefully holding his jacket. Lee Juri noted that the hunter Im Bohem wanted to pour the girl into the union of awakened ones, but she thought that her younger brother would cope with it much better, because he was not a hunter, but just an ordinary awakened one. Afterwards, the huntress noted that from a practical point of view, she would have gladly sent the girl to hunter training right away, but it was wrong to force it on such a young man. Lee Jiho watches as Lee's younger brother approaches them. Jury thought about her words about choosing between a hunter and an ordinary awakened. As if reading her thoughts, Lee Jury explained that she was there to give the girl such a choice. Lee Jiho looked at the huntress and her younger brother with confusion. These two were very similar to each other. Their facial expressions were the same. The guy came up and introduced himself as Lee Junwan, noting that he was the younger brother of that very tyranny, although the huntress didn't really like that joke. The housekeeper who was watching this wondered why not a single awakened person ever came in like a normal person, but everyone appeared very strangely. Lee Junwan noted that he had recently heard the girl awaken and asked about her well-being with a friendly smile. Lee Jury and her younger brother almost simultaneously began to tell the girl that she shouldn't have overexerted herself, or she might regret it. The huntress emphasized that the girl should have simply followed her brother. Lee Junwan called my sister a demon tyrant again, for which he received a blow to the shoulder and a request to keep quiet and do as they said. Well, it didn't upset him, on the contrary. It only made him laugh even more. He approached Lee Jiho and put his arm around her shoulder and suggested that they go. In a short moment, all three of them found themselves on the city street. Lee Jiho stood up to look around, not understanding where she was, and felt her head spinning. Lee Junwan explained that of all the local awakened unions, the one they were in had the best conditions and the largest base. It was also the headquarters of the Craftsmen's Union. Lee Junwan guessed that the girl must have heard of the master craftsman who sometimes made the news. Lee Jiho nodded and asked if she could really go inside. Lee Junwan approached her and explained that as an awakened person, she was considered an authorized person, so she could enter inside without any problems. Jiho asked if Junwan was also a member of this union, but the huntress noted that he was of very little use and that this base was for real professionals and elite artisans. Then the huntress added that, nevertheless, her brother was useful for rescue and evacuation operations, so he could not be called completely useless because teleporters were rare. They reached the checkpoint and Lee Junwan suggested that Lee Jiho go in first. Walking through the doors, the girl still couldn't believe that this was really happening to her. When she entered inside, she was completely confused because there were so many people everywhere and a huge amount of free space. Everything looked fantastic. The huntress remembered that the girl had spoken about not knowing basic things and asked what she knew about the rifts. Lee Jiho said that she knew what to do if a level 4 alarm went off, and a little about typical monsters and how to mark the location of survivors. Hunting noted that this was information that could be easily found anywhere. She promised to explain everything to the girl in order, and she agreed with a smile. The huntress said that immediately after the rift appeared, its energy remained unstable for several days. It was precisely in this state that new monsters often appeared. The association interpreted this as the formation of the rift's own ecosystem. Lee Jiho asked if the hunters could not enter the rift from the human post if new monsters appeared. The huntress explained that until the rift entered the stabilization phase, this was impossible. The rift seemed to perceive the awakened as monster-like creatures, and the variable energy within formed an ecosystem that included the awakened. If the awakened one entered during an unstable phase, then the energy of the rift did not stabilize, and either new monsters appeared, or in the worst case, the rift itself expanded, so everyone always waited for a stabilization period. From this, Jiho will conclude that the awakened ones could not be directed immediately, and clarified this with the huntress. There she explained that the stabilization of the rift was essentially the completion of the formation of the ecosystem. But if the unstable energy was disrupted by new variable energy, then the rift did not perceive the awakened one as a dominant predator. It was like a game where the balance changed. The rift created even stronger monsters, new predators. But just like the awakened once thought that strength made them heroes, but soon they quickly understood their place. Lee Junwan said that many awakened ones died at the hands of such merciless predators, since in the beginning the monsters were so strong that the hunters could only wait for the rifts to disappear on their own. He added that the ecosystem was becoming too high level and no one could save anyone. He smiled and explained that this was the very reason he quit his job as a hunter. Lee Jury agreed with his words and added that now they were only entering small cracks. Junwan explained that they were in uninhabited areas or in places where people had been evacuated thanks to an accurate forecast. He turned around and looked at Lee Jiho and noted that if she became a hunter, She would have to fight such monsters, and the girl was slightly scared. Lee Ji-ho emphasized that only if the girl is ready to look death in the face again and overcome fear will she be able to take up hunting work. Lee Junwon explained with a smile that otherwise she could have stayed in other positions like a coward, pointing to his sister. You awakened ones were always lacking. Lee Juri added that as soon as the girl woke up, her Rift app changed slightly. Lee Ji-ho did not know about such an app. She was told that it showed information about what was happening in the Rift in real time. They showed her this clearly on the phone, and Lee Ji-ho wondered why it wasn't visible in the regular app. The huntress assumed that this was because real-time information was not always accurate, which could even put citizens in danger. The girl then looked at her watch. She noted that it was time for her to go, and the hunter Boehm told them that everything was already finished. The huntress explained that at the time her job was to replace the temporary guardian. But now that her appointed guardian had arrived, she and her brother were no longer needed. Lee Juri walked up to the girl and gently straightened her hair, and hugging the girl by the shoulder, she assured her that wherever she went, she would always be well received, and it was worth thinking carefully about which path to choose. After that, Lee Jun-won, who had disappeared somewhere for a moment, returned with the huntress Im Boehm. Mrs. Boehm asked why Lee Juri took her younger brother, and she replied that she was told to show everything, but she could shift this responsibility to someone else. But Im Boehm didn't want any showdowns and then offered to show everything that was inside this headquarters, which made Lee Ji-ho very happy. They headed to the doors that led directly into the core of this office, where the most important rooms and equipment were located. Lee Ji-ho looked around with huge eyes, because she had never been to such places before. It was very interesting how this system worked from the inside. Im Boehm noted that the girl would take a long time to get used to everything she saw in this room. In one of the devices unknown to Ji-ho, she saw a monster and wondered if it was possible to take such things outside the rift. The huntress said that this could not be done with all of them. Usually they were used for processing and sorting into usable and unusable materials, such as food ingredients or byproducts, and the unusable ones were disposed of or turned into fertilizer. Lee Ji-ho Dasha couldn't imagine that monsters could be used for such needs. The huntress said that the utilization of the eye was carried out by the awakened with the fire or gravity type that incinerated these monsters. They were in a workshop where they made armor and weapons from byproducts, which was also surprising for Lee Ji-ho. The huntress showed her the armband, noting that it was made of spider material, and noted that everything that fell into the rift was easily broken, but the monsters were different. They were born and raised there, and while the rift was creating new monsters, the hunters were not sitting idle either. The hunter said that if the girl wants to work here, then the research will be enough. Next, they entered one of the dark halls with minimal lighting, which was filled with huge capsules. The huntress said that they created items for ordinary people and, for example, processed magic crystals, which were the most common byproduct of monsters. Lee Ji-ho was in complete delight watching all these processes, not wanting to look away even for a second. She explained that the technology for processing these complex materials was discovered quite recently, and any awakened person who could control variable energy could work with these processes. Lee Ji-ho was even more surprised to hear that anyone could get a position in this place. She thought that if the hunters were condensing the monster's energy to create magic crystals, if she trained, she might be able to do it without machines. Im Boehm smiled and looked at the girl and asked if she thought about the fact that she could do the same. Ji-ho was very embarrassed because her thoughts were read again, but the huntress asked her not to worry, explaining that this was actually the first thing they taught in basic training. Lee Ji-ho tried to put all the information she had received together and draw at least some conclusions for herself. The huntress looked at her and asked if she still wanted to become a hunter after everything she had seen. Lee Ji-ho didn't even know what to answer to such a question. She felt there was some kind of catch in it, but she couldn't figure out whether she was imagining it or not. Im Boehm repeated her question and smiled. I hope the girl will be able to tell her about it. She asked not to worry about her opinion, and if she wanted to be a hunter, then she should have gone this way. Lee Ji-ho looked down at the floor and clarified that it seemed to her that the huntress didn't want her to become a hunter either. Im Boehm hugged the girl by the shoulders and replied that it was not about her, but she simply believed that the work of a hunter was not the best choice for the awakened. But she did not deny that everyone could choose this path independently, sincerely desiring such work for themselves. The huntress noted that it is not nice to have any authority to interfere with this, and would rather support any choice. Im Bohem suggested asking team leader Park something about the hunter's work. Lee Jiho smiled slightly, thinking that his time had finally come. The huntress noted that it was useful to hear both sides' opinions so that she could ask someone else. When Park Chang-min heard this request, he was incredibly happy that the girl suddenly became interested in the work of a hunter. Lee Jiho suddenly found herself in a completely different place and began to shake her head sharply in search of Im Bohem, who had disappeared somewhere. Park Chang-min, seeing how scared the girl was, apologized for having overdone it a little. Lee Ji-ho took this teleportation very hard, and she vomited. Park Chang-min emphasized that long-distance teleportation was hard on the body and decided that he moved her too abruptly and apologized again. They were at the Hunters Association, and Park Chang-min explained that Im Bohem couldn't come because it was a closed area and gave the girl some water. He explained that Im Bohem did not have a very good attitude towards the hunting profession, so he started this conversation first. Lee Ji-ho assumed that Im Bohem might have attacked one of the hunters, and now she was not allowed inside. Park Chang-min laughed, assuring her that this was not the case, but on the contrary, she was one of the most friendly people to hunters. In that case, Lee Ji-ho didn't understand at all why this was happening and asked her to explain. Park Chang-min said that for awakened ones like Hunter Im, who originally had strong abilities, the job of a hunter could be especially difficult, and suggested that the girl follow him. He said that it was necessary to enter the rifts to save people and bring the necessary resources, and without what the hunters brought, the association could not work, and this was a huge responsibility. Lee Ji-ho still didn't understand what the closed zone had to do with what Park Chang-min was saying. She emphasized out loud that it was very strange to prohibit the huntress from moving for this reason alone. Soon, Park Chang-min led the girl down the corridor to a large door and invited the girl to enter. He announced that they had entered a hunter reinforcement center, and the girl immediately discovered several pairs of hunters who were training with each other. She assumed it was a lab, but Park Chang-min told her not to worry, explaining that everyone who participated in the experiments was in excellent shape. He pointed to one man and explained that he was the lead researcher. He was a civilian who had been dealing with rifts since the day of the Great Rift. He noted that the man seemed weak and asked the girl to treat him as if he was made of cotton candy. Park Chang-min explained that even a light touch could send him to the hospital for a month, so they had to be careful. Suddenly, the girl noticed one of the guys and became very excited. She asked if everything was okay with this man, because he looked extremely bad and his nose was bleeding. She also noticed that his energy was flowing in a strange way, and she became a little tense. Park Chang-min assured that everything was fine and that he was here in any case and that another teleporter was on duty nearby, just in case. Suddenly, this guy got even worse. What did you shout that he had abnormal readings and the order was given to everyone to evacuate? They activated the protective wall to protect everyone else from him. The guy was screaming loudly and it seemed like he was just going crazy. Lee Ji-ho got scared and asked what was happening to the guy, to which Park Chang-min explained that this did not happen often, but it still looked like the guy had overdone it by using his powers, which is why he had such consequences. Several hunters surrounded him and tried to isolate him with protective barriers. Lee Ji-ho wondered why the guy needed to bring himself to such a state. I understand that he felt very bad. Park Chang-min explained that the boy did it because if he didn't get stronger, more people would die. This also came as a shock to Lee Ji-ho. Park Chang-min said that everyone was striving for great skill and strength, and that was the mission they took on with the association. The duty of those who survived, thanks to the sacrifice of other defeated, consisted of this. Soon the young man became much lighter, and the protective barrier was partially removed and they came to his aid. While they were dealing with the guy and trying to help him, one of the researchers approached Lee Ji-ho and gave her quite a scare. She apologized for being so careless and for not being able to remember his name. Park Chang-min greeted the researcher and nodded his head in respect. The researcher was a little upset that the girl did not remember him. For Lee Ji-ho, his face was very familiar, but she could not remember where she had seen him. He was about to answer, but suddenly his face began to bleed slightly. He noticed this and laughed, and noted that it seemed he suffered a little being among all the hunters. Lee Ji-ho was really scared and almost screamed, trying to understand if everything was okay with him. Park Chang-min rolled his eyes and pointed out that it was now clear why the researcher had such a pale face, to which he pointed out that he had always been pale. Park Chang-min called the medics and asked the man to get checked. One of the hunters suddenly rushed towards this man and lifted him onto his shoulders and carried him somewhere. although he continued to assure everyone that he was completely fine. This guy, before he was taken away, shouted, calling Jiho. He introduced himself as Yang Sol and stated that he was very interested in her. He promised that they would definitely meet again, and after that, he was carried out of the hall. The girl stood there completely confused, not understanding what had just happened. Park Chung-min adjusted his glasses and told the girl that he wanted to show her the training halls at first, but it turned out the way it turned out, because she still had to see the amplification center. Park Chang-min showed the girl the Hunters Association, and then said that many hunters in this place continued to train even if they already had strong abilities. Survival skills were needed to avoid being killed by monsters, but the value of life that could be saved with these powers was priceless. Lee Jiho completely agreed with his words about the priceless lives of every person. Looking down, she saw a crowd of hunters training, exhausting themselves greatly. Park Chang-min would like to point out that all of these people risked their lives to save others, just like Jiho and himself. He watched the hunters training and smiled involuntarily. Lee Jiho did not expect such words from this man at all, considering what Im Bohem told her about him. These words really surprised her. A few days later, the girl herself began to train a little. Well, she met one of the awakened. She managed to become friends a little. Well, they discussed something during the training, and after her new friend noted the evidence of a noble sacrifice. Lee Jiho remembered and decided to ask why Dr. Yang couldn't enter the training room, to which the girl replied that he was constantly distracting everyone. The girl noted that every time Dr. Yang saw Jiho, he immediately became emotionally excited and constantly interfered with the normal training process. Lee Jiho was a little embarrassed, but the girl assured her that it was pure and true. She explained that Dr. Yang was one of the survivors of the Great Rift, and he had been studying the rift since the earliest times, and it was he who first discovered that some awakened became stronger through sacrifice. After that, they started training. Lee Jiho had a bow and arrows in his hands. It was worth learning how to shoot from it. She stood as I ordered the girl and, drawing out the bow, pulled the string. She needed to hit the bullseye of the target that was in front of her, but Lee Jiho could only hit the very edge of that target. The girl smiled and noted that Jiho had good strength, but his aim was poor, which she also agreed with a laugh. But the huntress emphasized that if Jiho had been perfect from the start, then training would have been pointless, and she should have kept up the pace. Lee Jiho pulled the bowstring again with all her concentration, trying her best. And when she shot, she hit the bullseye, which was huge progress for her. Right during the training, a notification about an emergency situation due to a sudden rift was heard over the loudspeaker. Lee Jiho and her mentor both tensed up, waiting for further instructions. The entire area around Kenmin University was in the impact zone. Rescue services were already on the scene. At that time, it was still difficult to establish the status of civilians in the area, and all available hunters had to immediately move out to eliminate the threat. Lee Jiho's mentor was not happy that the rift had happened again, since it had only been a short time since the past. Lee Jiho asked if the mentor would go there too. The girl emphasized that it was worth waiting for the fault stabilizer. For a moment, she thought about something and chuckled before falling silent. And after that, she invited Lee Jiho to go with the rest of the hunters, which surprised her greatly. Lee Jiho agreed, and they went to get all the necessary weapons and armor that would be needed. The teacher gave her the costumes and asked her to put them on just in case. Lee Jiho agreed and asked if she should also enter the rift, to which she received the answer that she would not enter the rift, of course. It was just necessary to help evacuate people and conduct several checks, and the hunters would not lead her where she herself did not want. He looked at how the girl was worried. The teacher asked if she wanted to stay home, but Lee Jiho resolutely answered that she would go with the others. The huntress smiled, pleased with such an answer, convinced that her ward was unusually brave. She said that the monsters couldn't stay in the rift for long, and then she threw the girl the gloves that she had forgotten about. The huntress asked her to keep a safe distance and listen carefully to the hunter's instructions, and Lee Jiho promised that she would listen to everything. After that, they went to the area where the rift occurred. As usual, there was a fuss, panic, and a lot of destruction. The hunters were already there and were trying to somehow isolate the rift with protective barriers. Lee Jiho followed her mentor's instructions exactly and was extremely focused. The huntress watched the girl's reaction all the time and was happy every time she saw her determination. When they got to the place, The huntress repeated once again that the girl should keep her distance and strictly follow the hunter's instructions. Lee Ji-ho promised that she would do everything with precision, and the huntress noted that she had forgotten something. She stuck a badge with her name on her suit. Let's note that it was a temporary hunter's pass. Na warned Lee Ji-ho not to get involved in the center of events under any circumstances, and to think that she had limited access. Also, Hunt said that the girl can stay away if she is scared. Lee Ji-ho thought about it for a second, learned that she will not allow herself to be away. She assured the station that she was okay and that she would go after her. A notification sounded that a shadow tiger had been spotted on the perimeter and hunters needed to prepare for an attack. People tried to evacuate the scene as quickly as possible and helped each other. But many did not manage to save themselves because the shadow tiger attacked them very suddenly, not allowing them to hide reliably. Cries for help were immediately heard. Lee Ji-ho immediately heard them, but she was a little confused and didn't know if she should rush to help them. She carefully began to approach the crowd and took out her bow, pulled the bowstring, and took aim. But suddenly someone grabbed her, forbidding her to use energy, and scared her a lot. Lee Ji-ho jumped up in place and turned around to the voice that scolded her for not knowing what could happen if she poured altered energy into the rift. He scolded her, noting that as a newbie she did not understand at all what she was going to do. Lee Ji-ho was completely confused and scared. She replied that she just wanted to help. He continued to scold her, emphasizing that the level of the rift could have increased and demanded to tell who brought her. Lee Ji-ho apologized, noting that she thought the people were in danger, but the man yelled at her, telling her to throw stones instead of using energy. She wanted to ask his name, but the enraged man had already managed to leave. Lee Ji-ho felt really bad because despite how much she wanted to help those people, she almost made a huge mistake. But she couldn't stand still, and seeing that the situation was getting worse, she ran to help the civilians. She gave one of the men a stone, noting that he could throw it at the monsters. Someone from the side shouted out that help was needed, and Lee Ji-ho immediately went to them. One of the boys had his arm torn off, and it was hard to find out how he got such a serious injury. He was very hysterical. Lee Ji-ho looked around and noticed how many victims there were already at that moment. How many people were injured, and how many people had already died. It was very hard for her to realize this, but she tried not to lose her composure and be as helpful as possible. She heard that someone on the side was looking for coagulants, and someone else needed other medications. I moved a little to the side but thought that I was right on the battlefield. She was very scared, but she knew that she had to be useful, so she took a huge stone with shaking hands, helping the hunters as best she could. But she couldn't hold on to it, and then collapsed to the ground, as another huge boulder fell nearby and hit her with a shockwave. One of the rescuers also ran up to her and started asking if she was okay. Lee Ji-ho was experiencing unusual stress and had difficulty understanding what was happening. The guy put his arm around her shoulders, asking if she was feeling unwell, so he could provide the necessary assistance. She emphasized to herself that the guy was in a rescue team uniform and decided that he was a civilian. The young man smiled and asked if she needed water or medicine. Lee Ji-ho smiled at him and thanked him for his help, saying that she was suddenly overcome with panic, but everything was already fine. He looked at her and after thinking for a second, said that they seemed to have already met. Lee Ji-ho looked at him closely and tried to remember if she had seen him before. The young man noticed her yellow badge and emphasized that she was in this place as a temporary hunter. The girl was surprised at how much this young man noticed and asked who he was. He said that during the previous break, he was with the mother of one of the students and why the girl froze in her tracks. The young man said that she kept trying to return for her child, but she couldn't do it. He barely managed to persuade this woman to run away with him, practically forcibly dragging her along with him. The woman was crying very loudly and did not even want to move from her place. Afterwards, the young man sadly said that after that he could not help her in any way and still did not understand why she ran out of hiding. Lee Ji-ho understood who he was talking about, and this made her completely depressed. Anxiety returned to her and she went into her thoughts for a moment. But the young man distracted her again. He smiled and noted that he was still happy, although he had not been able to sleep normally since then, and asked for Lee Ji-ho's phone number. Taking the girl's phone, he entered his number. I gave the phone back to Lee Ji-ho, but she didn't understand why he was giving her his phone number. At the time, he said that the student's survival was a miracle in itself. He said that in truth, most people perceive survival as a moral duty, and these words touched Lee Ji-ho. The young man said that when Lee Ji-ho wants to blame someone, she can contact him, and the moment will come when she wants to curse those who did not save her loved ones. Lee Ji-ho looked at him with eyes full of confusion and excitement. She knew what he was talking about, but she couldn't believe it. She remembered herself a little younger and realized where she had seen this guy. She remembered his facial features and was now sure that they had indeed met before. She couldn't take her eyes off him, but she couldn't really say anything to him either. Tears began to well up in her eyes, and she turned away so that the young man would not see this, and declared that this was not so. But he only laughed and asked her not to worry. He advised her to drink water and rest if she suddenly felt dizzy, and went on with his work. Lee Ji-ho helped him with her hand without even saying anything. She was not ready for such a conversation and could not move away from him for a long time. How long ago her mentor came up to her, exhaled heavily, and brushed the lint off her face, saying how hectic it was, and then asked what Lee Ji-ho herself was doing. Lee Ji-ho confirmed that she was busy and asked if they should now wait for the rift to stabilize. Her mentor confirmed this and said that they now had to take turns on duty for a few hours, since there might still be survivors. She said that the lesson would have to be postponed for a while. Lee Ji-ho thought for a while and asked about the fact that sudden breaks were now happening often. The huntress exhaled heavily again and replied that they had indeed been happening more and more often lately, and there had not even been time to rest. All the hunters were at their limit, and some came straight from another rift, which was already madness. When one of the hunters would break down right on the spot, it seemed that it was simply due to overexertion. Such situations were happening more and more often. Lee Ji-ho thought that such hunters could be called crazy. Lee Ji-ho, who remembers everything she knew and what she had seen in her life. The first image that came to her mind was that of the hunter who had yelled at her immediately after her arrival. He fit the description of a madman. She thought that she had seen him somewhere before, and then she remembered where. She thought to herself that she didn't want to cross paths with him anymore, because such people scared her very much.